Rain slammed against bulletproof windows while Serafina Vale watched the most dangerous man in the city walk through the door of Blackthorn Club like he owned the oxygen in the room. Lucian Drakov. The name alone made grown men reach for weapons. When he forced her abusive ex-boyfriend against a wall for humiliating her in public, she should have run. Instead, she felt something crack open inside her chest, something reckless and irreversible. Because the mafia king who terrified an entire city was now staring at her like she was the only thing in the world worth protecting. If you want to see how far Serafina falls into Lucian's dangerous world, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The rain started 3 hours before Lucian Drakov walked into Blackthorn Club, and Serafina Vale knew from experience that rain always brought trouble. She stood behind the marble bar polishing crystal glasses that cost more than her monthly rent, watching the city's wealthiest predators drink $1,000 scotch, while treating her like furniture. Invisible. Disposable. Exactly the way she'd felt for the past 2 years since dropping out of nursing school to work double shifts paying for her mother's cancer treatment. Her feet ached, her lower back screamed. The fake smile she painted on for rich assholes was starting to crack around the edges. Another round for table 7, Marcus, the floor manager, snapped without looking at her. And try not to look so miserable. These people pay your salary. Serafina bit down the response climbing up her throat. Marcus was a spineless piece of shit who enjoyed reminding the staff exactly how replaceable they were. She grabbed the bottle of Macallan 25 and headed toward table 7, weaving through clusters of business moguls and politicians who operated above the law because money bought everything in this city, including justice. Blackthorn Club wasn't just exclusive. It was a sanctuary for the corrupt, the kind of place where illegal deals happened over steak dinners and human trafficking routes were discussed like stock portfolios. Serafina had learned to keep her head down, pour drinks, and pretend she didn't hear anything worth remembering. Survival meant ignorance. Curiosity got people killed. She was halfway to table 7 when the front entrance opened, and the entire atmosphere shifted like someone had sucked the oxygen out of the room. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses froze halfway to mouths. Even Marcus went rigid, his usual arrogance draining into something that looked uncomfortably close to fear. Serafina followed everyone's stare toward the entrance and felt her breath catch. The man walking through the door moved like violence wrapped in a $10,000 suit. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from stone if stone could carry that much controlled fury. His eyes, cold, calculating, utterly devoid of mercy, swept across the room with the kind of authority that didn't require weapons or threats. He simply existed, and existence bent around him. Behind him came 4 men built like military operatives, hands resting near concealed weapons beneath tailored jackets. Not bodyguards. Executioners. "Who is that?" Serafina whispered to another server passing by. The girl went pale. "You don't know?" "Should I?" "That's Lucian Drakov." The name hit like cold water. Serafina had heard stories. Everyone in the city had heard stories, but she'd assumed they were exaggerated. Urban legends about a mafia kingpin who'd risen from nothing to control half the criminal enterprises on the East Coast. Drug routes, money laundering, contract killings. The kind of man who made people disappear when they became inconvenient. Now he stood 15 feet away looking like death incarnate, wearing Armani. The club owner, a nervous man named Gerald, who usually acted like he ran the world, practically sprinted across the room to greet Lucian with the desperation of someone trying not to get shot. Serafina couldn't hear the exchange, but she watched Gerald gesture toward the private VIP section like he was offering his firstborn child. Lucian said something brief, barely 3 words, and Gerald nearly tripped over himself leading the way. "Vele." Marcus grabbed at her elbow hard enough to bruise. "You're serving his table." Her stomach dropped. "What?" "You heard me? Move." "Why me?" "Because I said so. And because if you fuck this up, we're all dead." Marcus shoved the bottle of scotch into her hands. "Smile. Pour. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't make eye contact. And for the love of God, don't do anything stupid." Serafina's hand shook as she followed Marcus toward the VIP section. This was insane. She served drunk hedge fund managers and pharmaceutical executives, not crime lords who settled disputes with bullets. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to fake an illness, to do literally anything except walk into that private room. But her mother's medical bills were 3 months overdue. The nursing school loan collectors had started calling twice a day. She couldn't afford to lose this job, so she walked. The VIP section was separated from the main floor by frosted glass panels and soundproofing designed to keep secrets contained. Inside, Lucien sat in a leather armchair positioned like a throne, his men stationed around the room's perimeter like statues. The lighting was dimmer here, shadows pooling in corners where anything could hide. Serafina approached the table, acutely aware of how loud her heels sounded against marble. Every nerve ending fired warnings. Run! Leave! This man is dangerous. You're Scotch, sir. Her voice came out steadier than expected. Lucien didn't look up. He was reading something on his phone, one hand resting casually on the armrest while the other held a glass of water. Not alcohol, which struck her as odd. Up close, he was even more intimidating. Sharp jawline, faint scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the kind of face that belonged on ancient wartime generals, not modern criminals. She set the bottle down and turned to leave. Wait. The single word froze her in place. Not because it was loud, Lucien's voice was quiet, almost soft, but because it carried absolute authority. The kind of voice that didn't repeat itself. Serafina turned back slowly. Lucien was looking at her now, and the full weight of his attention felt like standing in front of an oncoming train. His eyes were dark. Not brown, not black, something in between, and utterly unreadable. She couldn't tell if he was angry, curious, or simply deciding whether she was worth noticing. "What's your name?" he asked. "Serafina, sir." "How long have you worked here?" 2 years. "Do you enjoy it?" The question caught her off guard. Enjoy it? Nobody asked servers if they enjoyed their jobs. She glanced at Marcus hovering near the entrance, remembered his warning about not speaking unless spoken to, and decided honesty was less dangerous than obvious lies. "No, sir." One of Lucien's men shifted uncomfortably. Marcus looked like he might have a stroke, but Lucien's expression didn't change. If anything, something almost resembling interest flickered across his face. "Why do you stay, Because I need the money." For what? This was spiraling into territory she didn't want to navigate. Sharing personal details with a crime lord felt like handing over ammunition, but something about the way Lucien asked, direct, without judgment, made lying feel pointless. "Medical bills," she said quietly. "My mother has cancer." Lucien studied her for a long moment, and Serafina fought the urge to look away. There was something deeply unsettling about being seen by someone who looked at people the way butchers looked at meat. Calculated, assessing, determining value. "That'll be all?" he said finally. Serafina nodded and retreated before he could change his mind. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she escaped the VIP section, and she didn't fully breathe until she was back behind the bar, putting distance between herself and whatever predatory interest she'd just sparked. "What did he say to you?" Marcus appeared beside her, looking panicked. "He asked my name." "That's it?" "That's it." Marcus exhaled like he'd been holding his breath underwater. "Don't read into it. Men like that don't actually care about people like us. You were just background noise." Serafina wanted to believe that. She poured drinks for the next hour, trying to forget the conversation, but her hands kept shaking and she kept catching herself glancing toward the VIP section where Lucien remained perfectly still, occasionally speaking to his men in low tones she couldn't hear. Background noise. That's all she was. Marcus was right, except Lucien hadn't looked at her like background noise. He'd looked at her like he was memorizing her face. The rest of her shift crawled forward at an agonizing pace. By the time midnight rolled around, Serafina's feet were screaming and exhaustion had settled into her bones like lead. She was counting down the minutes until closing when the front entrance opened again and her stomach immediately clenched into a knot. Chase Holloway walked in, flanked by 3 of his fraternity brothers, all of them wearing designer clothes and the kind of arrogant confidence that came from never experiencing consequences. Serafina's ex-boyfriend, the man who'd promised her the world during their first year of nursing school, then abandoned her the second her mother got sick because he couldn't handle that kind of baggage. 3 years later, and he was still the same spoiled trust fund asshole, except now he had a pretty blonde girlfriend and a job at his father's real estate firm that he absolutely didn't deserve. She tried to disappear into the back storage room, but Marcus intercepted her. Table 12 needs service. Send someone else. I'm sending you. Marcus, please. Now, Vale. Unless you want to explain to Gerald why you're refusing to do your job. There was no winning this fight. Serafina grabbed a tray and headed toward table 12, praying Chase was too drunk to notice her. But luck had never been her specialty. Holy shit! Chase's voice cut across the room like nails on a chalkboard. Serafina, is that you? She kept her expression neutral, professional. Can I get you gentlemen anything to drink? Chase leaned back in his chair, grinning like he'd just discovered something hilarious. Wow. I heard you dropped out of school, but I didn't realize you ended up as a cocktail waitress. That's rough. His friend snickered. Serafina's jaw tightened. What can I get you? She repeated. What happened to nursing? Chase pressed, clearly enjoying himself. Wasn't that your big dream, saving lives and all that heroic bullshit? We'll take 4 whiskeys, one of his friends interjected, sensing the tension but not caring enough to stop it. Serafina nodded and turned to leave, but Chase wasn't finished. Hey, how's your mom? He called out loud enough for surrounding tables to hear. Still dying? That must be expensive. Is that why you're working here, trying to pay for treatment you can't afford? Heads turned. Conversations paused. Serafina felt heat crawl up her neck, humiliation burning through her chest like acid. Every eye in the room was suddenly on her, watching her public dismantling like it was entertainment. Chase, don't... What? I'm just asking questions. He looked around at his audience, feeding off their attention. I mean, it's kind of sad, right? She gave up everything for a lost cause. Her mom's probably going to die anyway, and now Serafina's stuck serving drinks to people who actually made something of themselves. The words hit like physical blows. Serafina's vision blurred at the edges, rage and shame warring for dominance. She wanted to scream, to throw the tray at his smug face, to tell him exactly what kind of worthless parasite he was. But she needed this job. So she swallowed the fury climbing up her throat, forced her expression back to neutral, and started to walk away. Chase Holloway. The new voice came from behind her, quiet, cold, and absolutely terrifying. Serafina turned and felt her heart stop. Lucien Drakov stood 10 feet away, hands in his pockets, expression completely calm. But there was something in his eyes that made the temperature in the room drop 20 degrees. His men had materialized around him like shadows given form, and every single one of them looked ready to commit murder on command. Chase's grin faltered. Do I know you? Stand up. It wasn't a request. Chase glanced at his friends uncertainly, trying to maintain his bravado but clearly sensing the danger radiating off Lucien like heat from a furnace. Slowly, he stood. Lucien closed the distance between them in 3 smooth strides and grabbed Chase by the throat, not hard enough to choke, but firm enough to make the threat explicit. Chase's eyes went wide with panic as Lucien leaned in close, speaking quietly enough that only Chase and Serafina could hear. Apologize to her. I didn't mean... Lucien's grip tightened fractionally. Apologize. Now. Chase's face went red. I'm sorry. Jesus, I'm sorry, okay? Look at her when you say it. Chase's terrified gaze swung to Serafina. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said those things. Lucien held him there for another agonizing second, then released him abruptly. Chase stumbled backward, gasping and clutching his throat while his friends sat frozen in their chairs, too scared to move. If I hear you speak to her again, Lucien said conversationally, I will break every bone in your body slowly enough that you'll beg me to finish. Do we understand each other? Chase nodded frantically. Lucien turned his back on him, the ultimate dismissal, and walked away without another word. His men followed, and within seconds the VIP section door closed behind them, sealing them back into their private world. The entire club remained silent for a full 30 seconds before conversations resumed in nervous whispers. Serafina stood paralyzed, her mind racing to process what had just happened. Lucien Drakov, a man who didn't know her, who had no reason to care, had just defended her in front of everyone, not with words or sympathy, but with violence barely restrained beneath a civilized surface. Marcus appeared at her elbow, looking pale. Go home. Now. What? You're done for the night. Leave before this gets worse. Serafina didn't argue. She grabbed her coat from the back room and fled into the rain-soaked streets, her heart hammering and her thoughts spiraling in 1,000 directions. She should feel grateful, relieved, protected. Instead, she felt terrified. Because Lucien Drakov had looked at Chase with cold calculation, measuring exactly how much damage he could inflict before it became inconvenient. And then he'd walked away like breaking someone's bones was a Tuesday afternoon task he might get around to eventually. The rain soaked through her coat as she walked 6 blocks to the bus stop, too rattled to care about getting wet. She kept replaying the moment Lucien grabbed Chase's throat, the ease of it, the absolute confidence that no one would stop him because no one could stop him. She should stay away from Lucien, that was obvious. Men like him destroyed everything they touched. But when she closed her eyes, all she could see was the way he'd looked at Chase with lethal focus, defending her like she mattered, like she was worth defending. And that terrified her more than anything else. 3 days passed before Serafina saw Lucien again, and during those 3 days, her life started changing in ways that made no sense. Her landlord called to say someone had paid her rent for the next 6 months. Anonymous donor, he claimed, but wouldn't provide details. Her mother's oncologist left a message saying a new treatment plan had been approved. Experimental, expensive, usually unavailable, and funding had been secured through a private medical charity Serafina had never heard of. The nursing school loan collectors stopped calling. Each time something impossible happened, Serafina felt the walls closing in. She wasn't stupid. These weren't coincidences. Someone with enormous resources was systematically dismantling every financial burden suffocating her life. Someone who'd asked about her mother's cancer 3 days ago. She tried to convince herself it was paranoia. But on the 4th day, a package arrived at her apartment building addressed to her in handwriting she didn't recognize. Inside was a black wool coat, Burberry, based on the tag, that probably cost more than her car. No note, no explanation. Serafina stared at the coat for 20 minutes before her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered with her pulse climbing. Hello? Ms. Vale. The voice was smooth, professional, not Lucien's. Mr. Drakov would like to extend an invitation to dinner tomorrow evening. A car will arrive at 7. He asks that you wear the coat. The line went dead. Serafina sat on her apartment floor holding the phone, feeling like she'd just been swept into a current too strong to fight. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was dangerous, that accepting gifts from a crime lord was the beginning of a transaction she didn't want to complete. But her rent was paid. Her mother's treatment was covered. The crushing weight that had been suffocating her for 2 years had suddenly vanished like someone had snapped their fingers and rearranged reality. And Lucien had defended her when no one else would. The next evening, at exactly 7 o'clock, a black Mercedes SUV pulled up outside her building. The driver, one of the men who'd been with Lucien at the club, opened the rear door without speaking. Serafina climbed inside wearing the coat, her stomach twisted into knots, and tried not to think about all the ways this could end badly. They drove through the city in silence, eventually pulling up outside an Italian restaurant that looked expensive enough to require reservations 6 months in advance. The driver opened her door and gestured toward the entrance. Inside, the maitre d' led her through a dining room full of wealthy patrons to a private section in the back where Lucien sat alone at a table set for 2. He stood when she approached, old-fashioned manners from a man who probably had bodies buried in construction sites across the city. Serafina. He pulled out her chair. Thank you for coming. She sat, hyper-aware of how out of place she felt in this world of crystal chandeliers and 5-course meals. Lucien settled across from her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. You paid my rent, she said finally. Yes. And my mother's treatment. Yes. Why? Lucien considered the question while pouring water into her glass. Because you needed help, and I could provide it. People don't just... She stopped herself, trying to find words that didn't sound accusatory. What do you want from me? Dinner conversation. That's it? That's it. Serafina didn't believe him. Men like Lucien didn't give away thousands of dollars for nothing. There was always a price, always an angle. She waited for him to reveal it, but he simply gestured toward the menu. Order anything you want. The meal that followed was surreal. Lucien asked about her mother's condition, her abandoned nursing school dreams, the years she'd spent working double shifts at Blackthorn. He listened like her answers actually mattered, filing away details with the same focus he probably applied to business negotiations and territorial disputes. And he talked. Not about crime or violence, but about growing up in poverty in Eastern Europe, clawing his way out through intelligence and ruthlessness, building an empire from nothing because the alternative was death. There was no pride in his voice when he described his rise, just cold assessment of survival choices made by someone with no other options. "You don't have to justify yourself to me," Serafina said quietly. "I'm not justifying. I'm explaining." "Why?" Lucian's dark eyes fixed on hers with unsettling intensity. "Because I want you to understand who I am before you decide whether to keep accepting my help." "And who are you?" "Someone who takes what he wants and destroys obstacles in his way." He said it matter-of-factly, the way someone might describe being left-handed. "Someone who has done terrible things to survive and will do worse to protect what matters." "That's supposed to make me feel safe?" "No. It's supposed to make you informed." The honesty was almost more disturbing than lies would have been. Serafina set down her fork, appetite gone. "You're trying to scare me away." "I'm trying to give you a choice." "What choice?" "Stay in my life or walk away now. But understand, if you stay, everything changes." The weight of that statement settled over the table like a physical presence. Serafina knew he wasn't exaggerating. Men like Lucien didn't do casual relationships or temporary arrangements. If she accepted this, whatever this was, she would be stepping into a world where violence was currency and loyalty was purchased in blood. The smart choice was obvious. Walk away. Thank him for his generosity and disappear back into her ordinary, struggling, safe life. But when she looked at Lucien sitting across from her, she didn't see a monster. She saw loneliness carved so deep it had become part of his bones. A man who'd spent his entire life surviving instead of living, surrounded by people who feared him but never knew him, and for reasons she couldn't explain, that broke something open inside her chest. "I don't understand why you care," she said. "Neither do I." Lucien's voice was quiet. "But I do." The confession hung between them, raw and unexpected. Serafina searched his face for manipulation, for the angle she knew had to be there, but found only exhausted honesty from someone who'd stopped pretending a long time ago. She should leave. Right now. Walk out of this restaurant and never look back. Instead, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Lucien went completely still, staring at their joined hands like he'd never experienced physical affection before. Maybe he hadn't. Not without transactions attached. When he looked up, something vulnerable flickered across his expression before disappearing behind controlled neutrality. "I'll stay," Serafina whispered. "For now." It wasn't a promise, wasn't commitment, but it was enough. Lucien's fingers closed around hers, and Serafina felt the world shift beneath her feet. She'd just made a choice she couldn't take back, accepting an invitation into darkness that would either save her or destroy her completely. The driver took her home 2 hours later. Serafina climbed the stairs to her apartment in a daze, her mind spinning through everything that had happened. Inside, she found another package waiting outside her door. This one contained nursing school textbooks, expensive, current editions, and a handwritten note in elegant script. "You gave up your dreams for survival. You shouldn't have to choose between them anymore." No signature. Didn't need one. Serafina carried the books inside and spread them across her kitchen table, tears burning behind her eyes. These textbooks represented the future she'd buried 2 years ago, the life she'd sacrificed piece by piece until nothing remained except exhaustion and debt. And Lucien was handing it back to her like it cost him nothing. She should feel grateful, should feel relieved. Instead, she felt terrified by how much power she'd just given someone capable of erasing obstacles with a phone call and violence executed with surgical precision. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number again. "The coat looks better on you than I imagined." "Sleep well, Serafina." She stared at the message for a long time before responding. "How do you know I'm wearing it?" The reply came instantly. "Because you're practical. And it's cold tonight." Not an answer. A demonstration that Lucien paid attention to details most people missed, that he thought about her even when they weren't in the same room. Serafina climbed into bed still wearing the coat, her thoughts churning through implications she didn't want to examine too closely. She'd accepted help from a dangerous man, and now she was texting him at midnight like they were something more than strangers connected by coincidence and violence. This was a mistake. Had to be. But when she closed her eyes, all she could remember was the way Lucian looked at her during dinner, like she was the only real thing in his entire artificial world. And that terrified her most of all, because she was starting to look at him the same way. The weeks that followed blurred together in ways Serafina couldn't have predicted. Lucian didn't overwhelm her presence the way she'd expected. No constant texts, no possessive tracking, no demands for her time. Instead, he existed at the edges of her life like gravity, subtle but undeniable, pulling her orbit closer to his with calculated patience. Her mother's treatment progressed better than any doctor had anticipated. The experimental therapy worked miracles that traditional chemotherapy never could, and within 3 weeks her mother's color returned. Her appetite came back. She started talking about the future again instead of quietly preparing for the end. Serafina enrolled in nursing school's accelerated program with tuition mysteriously covered by a scholarship she hadn't applied for. The textbooks Lucian sent were just the beginning. Soon came a new laptop when her old one died. Then noise-canceling headphones for studying. Small necessities that appeared exactly when she needed them. Always anonymous, always perfectly timed. She knew it was him. Knew she should refuse. Knew accepting these gifts was building a debt she couldn't quantify or repay. But watching her mother smile again after 2 years of slow dying was worth any price. Lucien called every few nights around 11, when Serafina finished studying and her brain was too fried to maintain careful boundaries. Their conversations wandered through territory that felt dangerously intimate. Childhood memories, irrational fears, the specific exhaustion that came from pretending to be stronger than you felt. He listened to her complaints about anatomy professors and difficult patients during clinical rotations with the same focused attention he probably gave to territorial negotiations. And slowly, without meaning to, Serafina started looking forward to those calls. "You sound tired," Lucian said one Thursday night, his voice low through her phone speaker while she lay in bed staring at her ceiling. 12-hour clinical rotation. I'm pretty sure my feet are going to fall off. When's your next day off? Sunday. Why? I'll send a car at noon. At IA. Serafina's stomach flipped. They'd had 3 dinners since that first night. Elegant restaurants where Lucian asked about her classes and told fragmented stories about growing up in poverty, so extreme it made her own struggles look comfortable. But he'd never suggested daytime plans, never tried to integrate himself into her normal life beyond phone calls and carefully timed gifts. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere quiet. You need rest, not another formal dinner." The car arrived exactly at noon Sunday. This time the driver, a man named Victor who spoke with the same Eastern European accent as Lucian, handed her coffee exactly the way she liked it without being told. 2 sugars, light cream. The fact that Lucian knew her coffee order felt more invasive than any of the expensive gifts. They drove for 40 minutes into the countryside, eventually pulling up to a massive estate surrounded by iron gates and security cameras hidden in the trees. The house itself looked like it had been transplanted from European aristocracy. Stone walls, peaked roofs, gardens maintained with obsessive precision. Lucien waited on the front steps wearing dark jeans and a simple black sweater instead of his usual suits. The casual clothing should have made him look less intimidating. Instead, it emphasized how physically dangerous he was beneath the tailored armor. Broad shoulders, lean muscle, the kind of body built from violence instead of gyms. "Welcome to my home," he said simply. Serafina climbed out of the car, hyper-aware of how inappropriate her nursing school hoodie and leggings looked against this backdrop of wealth. "You live here?" "When I'm not in the city, it's quieter." Quieter was an understatement. The estate felt like its own isolated world, removed from reality by money and security measures. Lucien led her inside through rooms decorated with minimalist precision, expensive furniture, original artwork, everything perfectly arranged and utterly impersonal. No photographs, no mementos. Nothing that revealed who actually lived here. "It's beautiful," Serafina said, though beautiful felt like the wrong word. Sterile, maybe. Empty. "It's functional." Lucian's tone suggested he agreed with her unspoken assessment. "I had lunch prepared. Are you hungry?" They ate on a terrace overlooking manicured gardens, and Serafina tried to reconcile the surreal domesticity of sharing sandwiches with a crime lord while discussing her pharmacology exam. Lucien asked intelligent questions, remembered details from previous conversations, and never once mentioned the violent empire that paid for this peaceful sanctuary. "Can I ask you something?" Serafina said eventually. "Always." "Why me?" She set down her water glass, meeting his eyes directly. "You could have anyone. Models, socialites, people who fit into your world. So why are you spending your Sundays with a broke nursing student who lives in a shitty apartment?" Lucien was quiet for a long moment, his dark gaze steady on hers. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the exhausted honesty she'd started recognizing during their late-night calls. "Because everyone else wants something from me. Money, protection, status, fear. You're the first person I've met in 20 years who looked at me and saw a human being instead of a transaction." The vulnerability in that admission made Serafina's chest ache. "You barely know me." "I know enough." Lucien leaned forward slightly. "You work yourself sick taking care of your mother. You gave up your dreams without complaint because someone you loved needed you. You're exhausted and broke and still kind to people who don't deserve it. That tells me everything I need to know." "I'm not some saint, Lucien. I'm just surviving." "I know. So am I." The weight of shared understanding settled between them like a physical presence. Two people drowning in different oceans, recognizing the same desperation in each other's eyes. It should have felt tragic. Instead, it felt like the first honest connection Serafina had experienced in years. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Whatever you want to happen." "That's not an answer." Lucien's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I want you in my life, Serafina, but I won't force it, won't manipulate it. You decide the pace, you decide the boundaries. And if you decide to walk away, I'll make sure you're still taken care of without strings attached." "You're giving me power over you?" "Yes." "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm tired of controlling everything." His voice dropped lower, rougher. "And because you make me want things I stopped believing I could have." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and dangerous. Serafina's pulse hammered in her throat. She should establish distance, should remember that this man built his fortune on violence and fear, should protect herself from whatever this was before it consumed her completely. Instead, she reached across the table and laced her fingers through his. Lucien's entire body went rigid, his eyes locked on their joined hands like she'd just performed an impossible magic trick. When he looked up, something fierce and possessive burned behind his carefully controlled expression, want so intense it bordered on desperation. "Stay tonight," he said. Not a demand, a request that cost him something to voice. "Just dinner and conversation. You can have your own room. He stopped himself, jaw clenching. "I don't want you to leave yet." Serafina knew she should refuse. Knew spending the night at Lucien's estate was crossing a line that would be impossible to uncross. But exhaustion had worn down her defenses, and the idea of a quiet evening without responsibilities pulling her in 12 directions sounded like paradise. "Okay," she whispered. Relief flickered across Lucien's face before disappearing behind controlled neutrality. He squeezed her hand once, gently, then released it and stood. "I'll show you to your room." The guest bedroom was larger than Serafina's entire apartment, decorated in soft grays and whites that managed to feel warm despite the obvious expense. An ensuite bathroom contained a soaking tub that looked criminally comfortable. Fresh clothes, her exact size, waited on the bed like Lucien had planned this possibility well in advance. "I'll be downstairs if you need anything," Lucien said from the doorway. "Dinner at 7?" Serafina nodded, and he left without another word, pulling the door closed behind him with careful precision. Alone in the quiet luxury, she sank onto the bed and tried to process the choices she kept making. Every boundary she set seemed to dissolve the moment Lucien looked at her with that careful vulnerability, like she was the only thing anchoring him to humanity. She should be scared, should recognize the danger in becoming important to someone capable of such calculated violence. Instead, she felt wanted in ways she'd never experienced before. Not for sex or status or what she could provide, but for simply existing exactly as she was, exhausted, struggling, imperfect, and somehow enough. That night over dinner, Lucien told her about the books he'd read as a child, stealing them from libraries because his family couldn't afford purchases. How he taught himself English by reading American novels and practicing pronunciation until his accent mostly disappeared. How education had been his first weapon long before he ever touched a gun. Serafina shared memories of her father leaving when she was 12, her mother working 3 jobs to keep them afloat. The exact moment she'd decided to become a nurse, after watching her grandmother die in a hospital that treated poor patients like inconveniences. They talked until past midnight, and when Serafina finally retreated to her room, she felt like she'd spent the evening with someone who actually understood the specific exhaustion of building a life from nothing. She should have known that kind of intimacy came with consequences. The first crack appeared 3 days later during one of her clinical rotations at Mercy General Hospital. Serafina was checking a patient's vitals when another nursing student, a girl named Rebecca who'd always been friendly, approached with her phone extended. "Is this your boyfriend?" Rebecca asked, showing her a gossip blog post. Serafina's stomach dropped. The photo showed her and Lucien at one of their dinners, taken through the restaurant window by someone with a telephoto lens. The headline read, "Mystery Woman Spotted with Notorious Crime Lord Lucien Drakov." The article was vicious. It speculated about Serafina's motives, suggested she was either a prostitute or a gold digger, and included details about Lucien's criminal empire that made her blood run cold. Money laundering, suspected contract killings, federal investigations that never quite found enough evidence to prosecute. That's... Serafina's voice failed completely. Rebecca's friendly expression had shifted to something calculating. "You're dating Lucien Drakov? Seriously?" "It's not... We're just... Do you have any idea what people are saying? They're calling you his whore, saying you're sleeping your way into his organization." Rebecca's tone carried judgment wrapped in fake concern. "Girl, you need to be careful. Men like that don't date for love." The words hit like physical blows. Serafina excused herself to the bathroom and locked herself in a stall, hands shaking while she read through the entire article and the hundreds of comments beneath it. The online mob had already decided who she was, a desperate woman using her body to secure a crime lord's protection. Never mind that she and Lucien hadn't even kissed yet. Never mind that their relationship existed mostly in phone calls and conversations about her nursing school stress. Her phone buzzed. "Lucien, I've seen the article. Are you okay?" Serafina stared at the message, emotions churning between humiliation and rage. No, she wasn't okay. Her private life had just been broadcast to the internet for strangers to dissect and judge. Her reputation, the professional credibility she'd been building through exhausted clinical rotations and sleepless study sessions, was now permanently associated with organized crime. "Did you know this would happen?" she typed back. "I knew it was possible. I should have warned you." "Should have?" "I'm sorry, Serafina." The apology did nothing to ease the sick feeling in her stomach. Serafina finished her shift while fielding whispers from other students and judgmental looks from supervising nurses who'd clearly seen the article. By the time she got home, her phone had 17 missed calls from unknown numbers. Reporters, probably, looking for a statement about her relationship with a man the media portrayed as a monster. She turned off her phone and climbed into bed fully clothed, too emotionally demolished to care about dinner or homework or anything beyond the overwhelming desire to disappear. Someone knocked on her door an hour later, persistent, rhythmic, not stopping despite her ignoring it. Serafina finally dragged herself out of bed and checked the peephole. Lucien stood in her hallway alone, still wearing a suit like he'd come directly from some business meeting. His expression was carefully controlled, but tension radiated from him in waves. Serafina opened the door. "How did you get past building security?" "I own this building." "Of course he did." Serafina laughed. Brittle, exhausted laughter that held no actual humor. "You own my building. Did you know that before or after we met?" "After." Lucien's jaw tightened. "Can I come in?" She should refuse, should slam the door and cut all contact before the situation destroyed what remained of her normal life. Instead, she stepped aside and let him enter her tiny apartment that suddenly felt even smaller with him filling the space. "I'm sorry," Lucien said immediately. "I should have anticipated the media attention. Should have prepared you for what associating with me would cost." "Cost?" Serafina's voice cracked. People think I'm a prostitute, Lucian. My classmates are already treating me differently. One of my supervising nurses pulled me aside to ask if I needed help getting out of a dangerous situation. My entire professional reputation is now connected to organized crime, and She stopped herself, breath coming too fast. I can't do this. Then don't. Lucien's response was immediate, his voice rough. Walk away right now. I'll make sure the media loses interest. I'll have my lawyers shut down the gossip sites. You'll be yesterday's news within a week. Just like that? Just like that. Serafina searched his face for manipulation or anger, but found only the same exhausted honesty she'd heard during their late-night phone calls. He meant it. Would actually let her go without consequences because he'd promised her control over whatever this relationship was becoming. And that generosity made her angrier somehow. You don't understand, she said. I didn't sign up for this. I didn't ask to become tabloid fodder. I'm trying to build a career, Lucian. I need professional credibility. How am I supposed to be taken seriously as a nurse when everyone thinks I'm sleeping with a crime lord for money? You're not sleeping with me. They don't know that. They see a broke nursing student with a powerful man paying her bills, and they draw obvious conclusions. Her voice broke completely. I worked so hard to get back into school, to have a future beyond debt and exhaustion. And now it's all connected to you whether I want it to be or not. Lucian stood very still, and something dangerous flickered behind his controlled expression. Tell me what you need. I need this to not be happening. I can't give you that, but I can give you space, distance, public separation if that helps. Would that even work? The damage is already done. Then tell me how to fix it. Lucian's voice dropped lower, frustrated urgency bleeding through his usual calm. Tell me what you need, and I'll make it happen. I need you to not be who you are. The words exploded out of her before she could stop them. I need you to be someone I can care about without risking everything I've built. Someone whose presence in my life doesn't come with federal investigations and gossip columns, and she stopped, horrified by her own honesty. Lucian's expression went completely blank. Shut down. The vulnerability he'd been showing vanished behind cold walls built from years of protecting himself from exactly this kind of rejection. I understand, he said quietly. I'll go. He turned toward the door, and panic shot through Serafina's chest. Wait. Lucien stopped, but didn't turn around. His shoulders were rigid, hands clenched into fists at his sides. I didn't mean... Serafina's voice shook. I'm scared, okay? I'm terrified of what being with you means. But I'm also terrified of losing you, and I don't know how to reconcile those things. You shouldn't have to. Lucien's voice was rough. I knew this would happen eventually, knew my world would contaminate yours. He exhaled slowly. I thought maybe I could give you enough good to outweigh the damage. You have. Serafina moved closer, though everything in her screamed to maintain distance. My mother's alive because of you. I'm back in school because of you. You've given me my future back, Lucian. I just don't know if I'm strong enough to survive in yours. Lucian finally turned to face her, and the raw pain in his eyes nearly broke her. Then let me go, Serafina, while you still can. What if I don't want to? Then you accept everything that comes with me. The media, the danger, the violence, all of it, because I can't change who I am, and pretending otherwise would be lying to both of us. The ultimatum hung between them, brutal, honest, unavoidable. Serafina stared at the man who'd become impossible to ignore, knowing this moment would determine everything that followed. She could choose safety, could walk away and rebuild her normal life without the complications his presence brought, or she could step forward into the darkness and hope they didn't both drown. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She'd turned it back on without thinking. She glanced at the screen and felt her blood turn to ice. Unknown number. Text message with a photo attachment. The image showed her mother outside the hospital where she received treatment, taken from across the street with a telephoto lens. No message, just the photo. The implication was crystal clear. We know where she is. Serafina's hand shook so badly she nearly dropped the phone. Lucien! He crossed the room in 2 strides, took the phone from her trembling hands, and his entire demeanor shifted in an instant. The careful vulnerability disappeared, replaced by the cold, lethal focus she'd witnessed when he confronted Chase at the club. He pulled out his own phone and made a call, voice clipped and absolutely devoid of emotion. Victor, Serafina's mother needs security. Now. Full protection detail, 24 hours. Nobody approaches her without clearance from me directly. I don't give a fuck what it costs. Make it happen in the next 10 minutes or you're fired. He hung up and turned back to Serafina, something dark and furious burning behind his controlled expression. Someone's trying to threaten you through your mother. Who? I don't know yet, but I'll find out. This is because of me. Because I'm... Her voice cracked. This is my fault. No. Lucian's tone carried absolute authority. This is someone testing boundaries, seeing if they can use you to get to me. It won't work. You don't know that. Yes, I do. He gripped her shoulders carefully, forcing her to meet his eyes. Listen to me. Your mother will have protection. You will have protection. Nothing is going to happen to either of you because I won't allow it. You can't control everything, Lucian. Watch me. The certainty in his voice should have been arrogant. Instead, it was terrifying. The absolute confidence of someone who'd spent years building power specifically to protect what mattered to him. And somewhere in the past few weeks, Serafina had become one of those things. I want to see her, Serafina whispered. I need to make sure she's okay. Victor's already there, but we'll go now, together. They drove to the hospital in tense silence, Lucienne making phone calls in rapid-fire succession, while Serafina stared out the window trying to process what was happening. Someone had threatened her mother. Someone had crossed a line from gossip columns into actual danger because Serafina had made the mistake of caring about the wrong man. At the hospital, two of Lucian's men, built like military contractors, waited outside her mother's room. Inside, her mother sat in bed looking confused but unharmed, watching the late news without any awareness that armed guards now protected her door. Serafina? Her mother's face brightened. I wasn't expecting you tonight. Is everything okay? Serafina forced a smile that felt like it might crack her face. Everything's fine, Mom. I just wanted to check on you. Her mother's gaze shifted to Lucian standing in the doorway, and recognition flickered across her face. You must be the young man who's been helping with my treatment. Lucian stepped forward with careful courtesy. Mrs. Vale, it's good to finally meet you. My daughter talks about you. Her mother's tone carried the knowing warmth of someone who'd already drawn conclusions, though she's been very mysterious about the details. Mom, I'm Lucian Dreykov, ma'am, and Serafina's right to be cautious. My world isn't always safe. The honesty surprised both women. Serafina's mother studied Lucian with the same careful assessment she'd once applied to her daughter's high school boyfriends, except this time the stakes were infinitely higher. Are you good to my daughter? She asked directly. I'm trying to be. That's not what I asked. Lucian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I would die before letting harm come to her. If that's not good enough, tell me what is. Serafina's mother held his gaze for a long moment before nodding slightly. That'll do for now. But hurt her, and cancer won't be what kills me. Fury will. Despite everything, Serafina almost laughed. Her mother, weak from months of treatment, barely weighing 100 pounds, had just threatened a crime lord. And Lucian looked genuinely chastened. They stayed for an hour, keeping conversation light while security waited outside. When they finally left, exhaustion had settled into Serafina's bones like lead weight. I'm taking you to my estate, Lucian said once they were in the car. You're not going back to your apartment until I know who sent that photo. You can't just... Yes, I can. His voice carried no room for argument. You can fight me on this tomorrow when you've slept and your mother is under guard. Tonight, you're staying where I know you're protected. Serafina was too tired to argue. She leaned against the car window and closed her eyes, feeling the world tilt beneath her in ways she couldn't control. 3 weeks ago, her biggest problem had been paying rent. Now she had armed guards protecting her mother and a crime lord declaring she needed his fortress to stay safe. At the estate, Lucienne led her upstairs to the same guest room she'd used before. But this time, he lingered in the doorway instead of immediately leaving. I know this isn't what you signed up for, he said quietly. And I'm sorry my world is bleeding into yours. But I meant what I said. I'll find who did this. And then what? Then I make sure they never threaten you again. The casual implication of violence should have horrified her. Instead, Serafina felt something dark and primal stir in her chest, the savage satisfaction of knowing someone would actually fight for her protection. Don't do anything you'll regret, she said, I won't regret protecting you. Lucienne! He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her against his chest, arms wrapping around her with careful strength. Serafina's breath caught. They'd never been this physically close before, never crossed into territory that couldn't be explained away as friendship or mentorship or whatever safe label they'd been hiding behind. But now Lucian held her like she was the only solid thing in a collapsing world, and Serafina's hands fisted in his shirt without conscious decision. She could feel his heartbeat against her cheek, faster than expected, proving he wasn't as controlled as he pretended. Could feel the tension vibrating through his muscles, restraint barely maintained. Nothing's going to happen to you, he murmured against her hair. I promise. Serafina tilted her head back to look at him, and the naked emotion in his eyes stole her breath. Want, fear, desperation, all the things he usually kept locked behind careful control, suddenly visible because exhaustion or terror or something else had stripped away his defenses. I'm scared, she whispered. I know, so am I. Of what? Losing you. The confession hung between them, raw and devastating. Serafina's pulse hammered in her throat. She should step back, should reestablish boundaries before this moment became something neither of them could take back. Instead, she rose onto her toes and kissed him. Lucian went absolutely still for half a second, shock or restraint or both, before something inside him shattered completely. He kissed her back with years of loneliness collapsing into desperate hunger, one hand tangling in her hair while the other pulled her harder against him. It wasn't gentle, wasn't careful. It was need stripped of pretense, 2 people drowning and clinging to each other like the only available lifeline. Serafina's back hit the wall. She didn't remember moving, and Lucian's mouth traveled down her jaw to her throat, teeth grazing her pulse point hard enough to leave marks. She gasped, fingers digging into his shoulders, and felt his entire body shudder against hers. Tell me to stop, he said roughly against her skin. Tell me to walk away before I can't. Don't stop. Lucian lifted his head to stare at her, pupils blown wide, breathing ragged. Serafina, I don't want careful anymore. I don't want safe. I just want you. Something fierce and possessive burned behind his eyes, victory and terror mixed together. He kissed her again, deeper this time, hands sliding beneath her shirt to map bare skin with rough palms. Serafina arched into the touch, rational thought dissolving under the assault of sensation and want, and the specific relief of finally surrendering to something she'd been fighting since the night they met. They barely made it to the bed. Clothes disappeared in desperate movements. Lucien's mouth was everywhere. Her throat, her collarbones, the sensitive skin beneath her ear, while his hands learned every curve and hollow with focused intensity. Serafina pulled him closer, nails raking down his back, and felt him groan against her lips. When he finally pushed inside her, they both went completely still. Lucian's forehead dropped against hers, breath coming in harsh gasps, entire body trembling with restraint. Look at me, he commanded roughly. Serafina opened her eyes and met his gaze, dark, fierce, absolutely undone. In that moment, she saw past the crime lord and the violence and the carefully constructed walls to the man beneath. Lonely, terrified, desperate for connection he'd stopped believing he deserved. I love you, he said, voice breaking on the words. I shouldn't. It's selfish and dangerous, and you deserve better. But I love you anyway. Serafina's chest cracked wide open. She pulled his mouth back to hers and whispered against his lips, Then love me. Just love me. Lucian moved, and everything else disappeared. Later, hours later maybe, they lay tangled together in sheets damp with sweat, heartbeats slowly returning to normal. Lucien's fingers traced lazy patterns across Serafina's spine while she rested her head on his chest, listening to his breathing settle into something almost peaceful. We can't take this back, she said quietly. I know. Everything changes now. It already changed. Lucian's arms tightened around her. The moment you walked into my life, everything changed. Serafina lifted her head to look at him. In the dim light filtering through the windows, he looked younger, more vulnerable. The ruthless crime lord facade had completely dissolved, leaving only the exhausted man beneath. What happens tomorrow? She asked. Tomorrow I find who threatened your mother, and I make sure it never happens again. How? However necessary. The implication was clear. Violence would follow. People would probably die. The man currently holding her so carefully would become someone capable of calculated brutality, and she would have to accept both versions existed in the same body. I should be more scared of you than I am, Serafina whispered. Why aren't you? Because when I look at you, I don't see a monster. I see someone who's been surviving alone for so long he forgot what it felt like to be human. Lucian's breath caught, and when he kissed her again, it tasted like grief. You make me want to be better. Then be better, not perfect, just better. I don't know if I can. Try anyway. They fell asleep wrapped around each other while dawn crept across the sky. Two broken people who'd found something precious and terrifying in the space between safety and destruction. Outside, armed guards patrolled the estate. Downtown, federal agents monitored criminal enterprises searching for prosecutable evidence. Somewhere in the city, whoever had threatened Serafina's mother was already a dead man walking. But in that moment, none of it mattered, because Serafina had chosen to stay, and Lucien had finally let someone see past his carefully constructed walls. They'd crossed the point of no return together, and now there was nothing left to do except face whatever came next, side by side, even if it destroyed them both. Serafina woke to an empty bed and the muted sound of voices carrying through the walls. Morning light filtered through curtains she didn't remember closing, and for a disoriented moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then the previous night came rushing back, the threatening photo, her mother's hospital room, Lucien's arms wrapped around her, the way he'd whispered I love you like a confession that cost him everything. She sat up, pulling the sheet against her bare skin, and listened. Lucien's voice drifted from somewhere downstairs, low, clipped, absolutely devoid of the vulnerability he'd shown hours ago. Back to business. Back to being the crime lord who inspired fear instead of the man who'd trembled against her like he was afraid she'd disappear. Serafina found her clothes scattered across the floor and dressed quickly, ignoring the way her hands shook. Last night had changed everything. She'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross, chosen Lucien's dangerous world over the safe distance she should have maintained. Now she had to live with that choice, and whatever came next. Downstairs, she found Lucien in his office surrounded by 3 of his men, Victor, and 2 others she didn't recognize. A laptop sat open on the desk, displaying surveillance footage, and the atmosphere was thick with barely contained violence. All 4 men looked up when she entered, and Lucien's expression shifted instantly from cold calculation to something softer. You should be sleeping, he said. I heard voices. Serafina moved closer, studying the surveillance footage. Did you find who sent the photo? Victor exchanged a glance with Lucien, clearly uncomfortable. Lucien's jaw tightened. We're working on it. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now. He stood and crossed to her, hands settling on her shoulders with careful pressure. Go back upstairs. Eat breakfast. I'll come find you when I have real information. Don't do that. Do what? Treat me like I'm fragile, like I can't handle whatever you're dealing with. Serafina held his gaze steadily. I chose this, Lucien. Chose you. That means I don't get to hide from the ugly parts anymore. Something fierce flickered behind his eyes, pride mixed with concern. He studied her face for a long moment before nodding slowly. The photo was sent from a burner phone purchased 3 days ago in Brooklyn. Whoever bought it paid cash, avoided cameras. Professional work. So you don't know who it was? Not yet, but the timing suggests someone who knew about us before the gossip article went public. Someone watching you specifically. Ice crawled down Serafina's spine. Watching me? For how long? We're still determining that. Lucien's hands tightened fractionally on her shoulders. But I have people checking security footage from your apartment building, the hospital, your school. If someone's been following you, we'll find them. And then? Then I make sure they understand what happens when they threaten what's mine. The possessive declaration should have bothered her. Instead, Serafina felt dark satisfaction curl in her chest, the savage comfort of knowing someone would actually fight for her safety instead of abandoning her when things got complicated. She was becoming someone she didn't fully recognize, and she wasn't sure if that terrified or relieved her. Victor's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his expression went carefully blank. Boss, you need to see this. Lucien released Serafina and crossed back to the desk. Victor pulled up something on the laptop. More surveillance footage, this time from what looked like a parking garage. The timestamp showed yesterday afternoon, hours before the threatening photo arrived. The footage showed a man in a dark jacket and baseball cap approaching Serafina's car. He moved with practiced efficiency, checking for cameras before pulling something from his pocket and attaching it beneath her rear bumper. The whole thing took less than 30 seconds before he disappeared back into the shadows. GPS tracker, Victor said quietly. We found it this morning when we swept your vehicle. Military grade, expensive. Serafina's stomach turned over. Someone's been tracking my movements? For at least 3 days based on the device's data log. Lucian's voice had gone flat and dangerous. They know everywhere you've been. Your apartment, the hospital, my estate, everything. Why would... She stopped, realization hitting like cold water. They're not trying to hurt me. They're using me to track you. That's what I thought initially, but the photo of your mother suggests different intent. Lucien rewound the footage, freezing on the clearest frame of the man's face. Victor, run facial recognition, cross-reference with known associates of the Constantine family. The name meant nothing to Serafina, but Victor's expression darkened immediately. You think Dimitri's making a move? I think someone's testing boundaries to see how I react. And Dimitri's been looking for leverage ever since I took over the Brooklyn docks. Who's Dimitri? Serafina asked. Lucien's jaw clenched. Dimitri Constantine. He runs what's left of the Russian syndicate in New York. We've been in territorial negotiations for the past 6 months that aren't going his direction. If he thinks you're important to me... He stopped himself, exhaling slowly. He'll use you as pressure to force concessions. By threatening my mother? By threatening everything you care about until I give him what he wants. It's textbook intimidation. Lucien closed the laptop with controlled force. But he miscalculated. I don't negotiate under duress. I eliminate problems. The casual mention of elimination sent chills across Serafina's skin. What does that mean? It means you and your mother are under protection until this is resolved. It means Dimitri learns what happens when he crosses certain lines. Lucien turned to Victor. Double the security detail at Mercy General, and I want eyes on every Constantine property. If Dimitri so much as breathes wrong, I want to know about it. Victor nodded and left with the other 2 men, pulling out phones to make arrangements. Alone with Lucien, Serafina felt the weight of the situation settle over her like concrete. This wasn't abstract danger anymore. Someone was actively hunting information about her, tracking her movements, preparing for something she couldn't predict. I should go home, she said quietly. This is escalating because of me. If I create distance between us publicly, no. Lucien's response was immediate and absolute. That won't make you safer. It'll make you vulnerable. Dimitri already knows you matter to me. Pushing you away now just signals weakness. So I'm bait. You're protected. There's a difference. Is there? Serafina's voice came out sharper than intended. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like caring about you just painted a target on my back. Lucien crossed to her in 3 strides, hands framing her face with surprising gentleness. I won't let anything happen to you, I promise. You can't promise that. You're not invincible, Lucien. And the more your enemies learn about how much I matter, the more dangerous this becomes for both of us. Then they learn what it costs to threaten what's mine. His voice dropped lower, rougher. I've spent 20 years building power specifically so I'd never be vulnerable again, so I could protect what mattered without compromise. You matter, Serafina, more than territory or profit or whatever the fuck Dimitri thinks he can extort from me, and I will burn his entire organization to ash before I let him touch you. The declaration was terrifying in its intensity. Serafina searched his face and found absolute conviction, the kind of certainty that didn't allow for doubt or failure. Lucien had decided she was worth protecting, and that decision would reshape whatever conflict was brewing between him and Dimitri Constantine, regardless of the consequences. I'm scared, she whispered. Good. Fear keeps you careful. He pressed his forehead against hers, breathing slowly. But don't let it paralyze you. We'll handle this together. Serafina wanted to believe that, wanted to trust that Lucien's power and resources would be enough to keep her safe while they navigated whatever war was coming. But doubt gnawed at her certainty, whispering that loving someone this dangerous meant accepting eventual catastrophe. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and felt her blood turn to ice. Unknown number. Text message with another photo attachment. This time, the image showed her mother's hospital room from inside, taken through the window from a position that should have been impossible to access. Her mother sat in bed reading a book, completely unaware she was being photographed. And in the bottom corner of the frame, deliberately included, was today's newspaper showing the current date. The message beneath was brief. Protection means nothing if we're already inside. Lucian read the message over her shoulder, and his entire demeanor shifted into something cold and lethal. He pulled out his phone and dialed with barely controlled fury. Victor, someone breached Mercy General's security. I want the entire hospital locked down. Now. Move my detail to Mrs. Vale's room and don't let anyone except approved medical staff within 50 feet of her. I don't care if it causes a scene. Make it happen. He hung up and turned back to Serafina, and for the first time since they met, she saw genuine fear behind his controlled expression. Get dressed. We're going to the hospital. They drove in tense silence, Lucian making rapid-fire calls coordinating security, while Serafina stared at her phone trying to process the implications. Someone had bypassed hospital security, gotten close enough to photograph her mother through a window, and sent the evidence as a taunt. This wasn't random intimidation anymore. This was calculated psychological warfare designed to prove Lucien's protection was insufficient. At Mercy General, chaos had erupted. Hospital security argued with Lucien's men about the armed presence in patient areas while administrators tried to maintain order. Lucien ignored all of it, striding through corridors with Serafina beside him until they reached her mother's room. Inside, her mother sat in bed, surrounded by 4 armed guards, looking confused and frightened. Serafina? What's happening? These men won't let anyone in or out. It's okay, Mom. Serafina crossed to the bed and took her mother's hand, feeling how fragile the bones were beneath paper-thin skin. Someone's been making threats. Lucien's just being cautious. Threats? What kind of threats? The kind that require extra security for a few days. Lucien moved to the window, examining the view outside with professional assessment. Mrs. Vale, I apologize for the disruption, but until we resolve this situation, these men will stay close. They're here to protect you, nothing more. Serafina's mother studied him with sharp intelligence. This is because of your world, isn't it? Because my daughter cares about you? Yes, ma'am. And you think you can keep her safe? I'll die trying. The honesty was brutal and absolute. Serafina's mother held his gaze for a long moment before nodding slowly. Then I suppose we're stuck with each other. But young man, if anything happens to my daughter because of your choices, it won't. Lucien's voice carried the weight of a blood oath. I promise you that. A hospital administrator appeared in the doorway looking harassed. Mr. Drakov, we can't maintain this level of security presence. It's disrupting patient care and violating. Then transfer Mrs. Vale to a private facility where I can control access. Lucian's tone allowed no argument. I'll cover all costs, but she's not staying in a hospital where your security is so compromised that someone photographed her through a window. That's impossible. We have cameras, locked doors, and yet someone got close enough to take this picture. Lucien showed him the phone image. The administrator's face went pale. So either your security is incompetent or someone on your staff is compromised. Either way, Mrs. Vale is leaving. Today. Within 2 hours, arrangements had been made. Serafina's mother was transferred to a private medical facility 40 minutes outside the city. Smaller, exclusive, surrounded by enough security to protect a head of state. The oncology staff came from Mercy General, vetted personally by Lucien's people, and the room was more like a luxury hotel suite than a hospital. This is insane, Serafina's mother whispered once they were alone. Honey, are you sure about this man? About what being with him means? Serafina wanted to lie, wanted to reassure her mother that everything would be fine and this level of security was temporary overreaction. But lying felt pointless when armed guards stood outside the door and her mother's entire life had just been uprooted because someone wanted to hurt Lucian through her. No, she said quietly. I'm not sure about anything anymore, but I love him, Mom, and he's trying to keep us both safe. Love isn't always enough, sweetheart. I know, but it's all I have right now. Her mother squeezed her hand gently. Then hold on to it, but keep your eyes open. Men like Lucien, men who live in violence, they can love you and still destroy you.
sometimes without meaning to. The words haunted Serafina during the drive back to Lucian's estate. She sat beside him in the back of the SUV, watching his jaw clench and unclench while he worked through whatever violent calculations occupied his mind. He'd barely spoken since leaving the medical facility, all his energy focused on coordinating response to a threat he couldn't yet identify or eliminate. "Talk to me," she said finally. "Not now." "Lucien."
I said not now. His voice came out harsher than intended. He caught himself, exhaling slowly. "I'm sorry. I'm trying to figure out how Dimitri got inside Mercy General without triggering any alarms. Could it be someone else? Not Dimitri? It's possible, but unlikely. The timing, the tactics, it matches his style. Psychological pressure followed by escalation. Lucien's hands clenched into fists. I should have anticipated this. Should have moved your mother to secured location the moment we started seeing each other publicly. You're not responsible for—
"Yes, I am." He turned to face her, and the guilt in his eyes was devastating. "This is what my world does, Serafina. It takes everything good and contaminates it with violence until nothing clean remains. You were right to be scared, right to want distance. I should have listened. I chose to stay. You shouldn't have had to make that choice." The car pulled through the estate gates and stopped in front of the main house. Victor waited on the steps with an expression that made Serafina's stomach drop. Whatever news he carried, it wasn't good. Lucian climbed out and crossed to him immediately. "What happened?" "We identified the man who planted the tracker." Victor handed over a tablet showing an enhanced image from the parking garage footage. "His name is Alexei Volkov, former Spetsnaz, now freelance security consultant. He's worked for the Konstantin family before." "So it is Dimitri." "That's what we thought. But then we pulled Alexei's phone records." Victor swiped to another screen showing call logs. "He received 3 calls in the past week from a number registered to a shell company. We traced the ownership through 6 layers of corporate protection." "And?" Victor hesitated, glancing at Serafina with obvious discomfort. "The shell company is owned by Marcus Sterling, Blackthorn Club's floor manager." The name hit Serafina like a physical blow. Marcus. The spineless manager who'd ordered her to serve Lucian's table that first night, who'd been working at Blackthorn for 3 years, who knew her schedule, her financial situation, every detail of her struggling life. "That doesn't make sense," she said. "Marcus doesn't have the resources for—" "He doesn't need resources. He just needs motivation and access." Lucian's voice had gone deadly quiet. "Marcus works for someone else, someone who wanted information about me and used him to get it." "Who?" "That's what we're going to find out." Lucian turned to Victor. "Where is Marcus now?" "At his apartment in Queens. We've had eyes on him since we identified the connection. He hasn't left since yesterday evening."
"Good. Keep him there. I'm going to have a conversation with him about professional boundaries." The casual way Lucian said conversation sent ice through Serafina's veins. This wouldn't be talking. This would be interrogation backed by the kind of violence that left permanent damage. "I'm coming with you," she said. "Absolutely not." "He used information about me, Lucien. Used my relationship with you to—" She stopped, anger and betrayal churning in her chest. "I deserve to hear what he has to say. What he's going to say won't be pleasant, and I won't have you witness—" Lucian caught himself. "This isn't your world, Serafina. Not yet." "You keep saying that, but I'm already in it whether I want to be or not. So stop protecting me from reality and let me see exactly what loving you means." They stared at each other in tense silence, both understanding this was about more than Marcus. This was about whether Serafina could actually survive in Lucian's world, or whether the violence would eventually break her, whether she was strong enough to witness the darkness and still choose to stay. Finally, Lucien nodded once. "Fine. But you stay in the car. You watch through the security feed, but you don't come inside. That's non-negotiable." The drive to Marcus's apartment took 45 minutes through afternoon traffic. Serafina sat rigid in the back seat, watching Lucien make preparations with the cold efficiency of someone who'd done this countless times before. He spoke to Victor in low tones, discussing entry strategies and securing the location, and every word reminded Serafina that the man she loved was capable of calculated brutality when circumstances required it. Marcus lived in a rundown building in a part of Queens where gentrification hadn't quite reached.
The hallways smelled like mildew and desperation, and graffiti-covered walls that hadn't seen maintenance in years. Victor entered first with two other men, securing the apartment before Lucien followed. Serafina stayed in the SUV as promised, watching the live security feed Victor had set up on a tablet. The camera angles showed Marcus's living room, cheap furniture, unwashed dishes, walls bare except for a single mirror. Marcus sat on his couch in pajama pants and an old t-shirt, clearly not expecting company. Then Lucien walked in. Marcus's face went from confusion to terror in the space of a heartbeat. He tried to stand, to run, but Victor grabbed him and shoved him back onto the couch with casual force. Lucien settled into a chair across from him, completely calm, and the contrast between his controlled demeanor and Marcus's obvious panic was chilling. "We need to talk about professional ethics," Lucien said conversationally. I don't know what... "Don't insult my intelligence, Marcus. You hired Alexei Volkov to track Serafina Vale. You provided her schedule, her routines, detailed information about her life, and you did it because someone paid you. I want to know who." "I didn't..." Lucien moved so fast Serafina barely registered the motion. 1 second he sat in the chair, the next his hand was wrapped around Marcus's throat, not choking but applying enough pressure to make the threat explicit. "I'm going to ask one more time. Who paid you to track Serafina?" "Chase!" Marcus gasped out. "Chase Holloway paid me. He wanted to know where she was going, who she was seeing. Said it was just jealousy, you know? Ex-boyfriend shit. I didn't know it would..." Serafina's world tilted sideways. Chase. Her pathetic ex-boyfriend who'd humiliated her at Blackthorn Club. The trust fund asshole Lucien had threatened into apologizing. He was behind this? Behind the tracker and the threatening photos, and how much did he pay you? Lucien's voice was deadly quiet. 20,000. But he said it was just surveillance. He didn't say anything about threats or, "Where can I find Chase Holloway right now?" "I don't know. I swear I don't know. He just called me, gave me instructions." Lucien released him abruptly and pulled out his phone, dialing without taking his eyes off Marcus. "I need a location on Chase Holloway. Manhattan address, known associates, current whereabouts, priority flag." "Yes, the same Chase Holloway who works at his father's real estate firm. Move fast." He hung up and turned back to Marcus, who was clutching his throat and breathing hard. "You're going to give Victor everything. Phone records, meeting locations, every detail of your arrangement with Chase, and then you're going to disappear from New York. Because if I see you again, if I even hear your name mentioned in this city, I will finish what I started here. Do we understand each other?" Marcus nodded frantically. Lucien stood and walked out without another word, his expression carved from granite. Back in the SUV, he climbed in beside Serafina and sat in rigid silence while Victor coordinated the interrogation continuing inside. "Chase," Serafina finally said. "This whole time, it was Chase. He hired professional surveillance. That requires resources and contacts beyond what a trust fund asshole typically has access to." Lucien's voice was flat. "Someone helped him, taught him how to find Alexei, how to structure the arrangement. This goes deeper than jealousy." "What are you going to do to him?" "What I should have done the night at Blackthorn." He turned to face her, and the cold fury in his eyes was terrifying. "I'm going to make him understand what happens when people threaten what's mine. And then I'm going to find whoever's really behind this, because Chase is too stupid to have planned this alone." Serafina's phone buzzed. She pulled it out with shaking hands and felt her heart stop. Chase's name appeared on the screen. Text message. "Did you really think Lucien could protect you? Check your mother's room again. 3rd time's the charm. No photo this time. Just words designed to send her spiraling into panic." Serafina immediately called the medical facility where her mother was staying. The line rang 4 times before someone answered. A nurse Serafina didn't recognize. "I need to speak to my mother, Margaret Vale, room 304. "I'm sorry, but Mrs. Vale is currently undergoing an emergency procedure." "What? What kind of procedure?" "I'm not authorized to provide details. You'll need to speak with..." Serafina hung up and turned to Lucien, terror clawing up her throat. "Something's wrong at the facility. They said my mother's in an emergency procedure, but they won't tell me what..." Lucien was already dialing, his expression locked into lethal focus.
Get me the head of security at Blackwood Medical. I don't care if he's in a meeting, get him on the phone now. This is Lucien Drakov, and if Mrs. Vale is harmed in any way, your entire operation is finished. The drive to the medical facility took 30 minutes that felt like 30 hours. Serafina sat rigid with fear while Lucien coordinated with security, and Victor worked his phone trying to determine what had triggered the emergency procedure. Every worst-case scenario played through her mind on repeat. Her mother poisoned, attacked, dying while Serafina had been watching Marcus's interrogation instead of staying close. At Blackwood Medical, the head of security met them in the lobby looking pale. Mr. Drakov, there's been a situation? Where is Margaret Vale? Lucian's voice could have cut glass. She's stable. She's in her room. But we found... The security director pulled out a tablet showing footage from the hallway outside her mother's room. One of the nurses attempted to enter Mrs. Vale's room with unauthorized medication. Our details stopped her before she made contact, but when we ran her credentials, they came back fake. The woman doesn't actually work here. Serafina's legs nearly gave out. Someone had sent a fake nurse into her mother's room, with medication that was probably poisoned or designed to trigger a fatal reaction. If Lucian's security hadn't been there, where is this woman now? Lucian asked. In custody. We have her in a secured room waiting for police. I want to see her, now. The security director hesitated. Mr. Drakov, if this is connected to criminal activity, we should really wait for law enforcement. I don't wait for anyone. Lucian's tone carried absolute authority. Take me to her, or I'll find her myself. They followed the security director through secured corridors to a small office where the fake nurse sat handcuffed to a chair with 2 guards standing watch. She looked young, mid-20s, pretty in an unremarkable way, the kind of face that disappeared in crowds. But her eyes were cold and calculating when they landed on Lucian. Lucien Drakov, she said with a slight accent. Eastern European, like Lucien's. I was wondering when you'd show up. Who sent you? No one sent me. I volunteered. Bullshit. Who are you working for? The woman smiled, sharp and humorless. You don't remember me. Why would you? I was just another casualty in your empire building. Another family destroyed when you took over the shipping routes 3 years ago. Lucien went very still. What's your name? Katerina Sokolov. My father was Nikolai Sokolov. You killed him when he refused to surrender his territory. The name clearly meant something to Lucian. His expression didn't change, but tension radiated from him in waves. Nikolai Sokolov refused to negotiate. He tried to have me assassinated, twice. When diplomacy fails, people make choices. My father made a choice to protect his family's legacy. You made a choice to destroy it. Katerina leaned forward as much as the handcuffs allowed. And now I'm making a choice to destroy yours. How does it feel knowing someone you love is vulnerable? Knowing all your power and resources can't actually keep her safe? You failed. Mrs. Vale is fine. This time. But I got close, didn't I? Closer than anyone else has managed. Your security stopped me today, but there will be tomorrow, and the day after. And eventually, she smiled again, eventually I'll succeed, because you can't watch everyone you care about forever. And I'm very patient. Serafina felt cold spread through her entire body. This wasn't about chase or jealousy or intimidation. This was revenge. Personal, calculated revenge from someone who'd spent years planning how to hurt Lucien the way he'd hurt her. Chase Holloway, Lucien said quietly. How do you know him? We met at a party 6 months ago. He was drunk and complaining about his ex-girlfriend who'd moved on to someone way out of his league. When he mentioned your name, I saw an opportunity. I taught him how to hire surveillance, helped him coordinate the tracker and the photos. Let him think he was the one in control, while I positioned myself exactly where I needed to be. Katerina's eyes glittered with malice. Chase is an idiot, but useful idiots serve a purpose. And that purpose was? Getting close to what matters to you, learning your patterns, finding the weakness in your armor. She looked directly at Serafina. Her. You'd burn your empire for her. That makes her the perfect target. Lucien moved so fast no one could react. He grabbed Katerina by the throat and lifted her partially out of the chair, handcuffs rattling against metal. The security guards started forward, but Victor blocked them with one raised hand. Listen very carefully, Lucien said, his voice dropping to something absolutely lethal. You failed today. You'll fail tomorrow. You'll keep failing until I decide you're not worth the effort anymore.
And when that happens, you'll disappear so completely that not even dental records will identify what's left. Your father chose war with me and lost. If you want to follow his path, I'll oblige you. But understand, you won't like where it ends."
He released her abruptly and stepped back, breathing controlled fury. Katerina rubbed her throat, eyes still cold despite the obvious threat. "We'll see," she said. "We'll see how long you can keep her safe before something slips, before I find the gap in your protection and finish what I started." Security escorted Katerina away while Serafina stood frozen, trying to process the nightmare unfolding around her. This woman, this stranger with legitimate grievances against Lucian, had spent months orchestrating an attack designed to hurt him through Serafina. And she wasn't finished. Wouldn't be finished until either she succeeded or Lucien killed her. "I need to see my mother," Serafina whispered. Lucian nodded and led her upstairs to her mother's room. Inside, her mother sat in bed looking shaken but physically unharmed, surrounded by the security detail that had stopped Katerina's attack. She reached for Serafina the moment she entered, and Serafina collapsed into the embrace, feeling her mother's heartbeat against her cheek. Proof of survival, fragile and precious. "I'm okay, honey," her mother whispered. "I'm okay." Those men stopped her before anything happened. But something had happened. Someone had gotten close enough to kill her, would have killed her if not for Lucien's paranoid security measures. And that someone was still out there, still planning, still determined to hurt Lucien by destroying everything he cared about. Serafina pulled back and looked at Lucian standing in the doorway, watching them with an expression carved from guilt and barely contained rage. In that moment, she saw the impossible position they'd created. Lucien's world demanded violence and control. Her presence in that world made her a target that no amount of security could permanently protect. And her mother, fragile, still recovering from cancer, completely innocent, was now caught in crossfire she'd done nothing to deserve. "I can't do this," Serafina said quietly. Lucien's entire body went rigid. "What? I can't keep putting my mother at risk. Can't keep dragging her into your wars." Tears burned behind her eyes. "Katerina almost killed her today, Lucien. Would have killed her if your men hadn't been there. And she's not going to stop. She's going to keep trying until she succeeds, or you kill her. And either way," her voice cracked. "Either way, my mother dies, or you become the monster everyone says you are. And I can't live with either option." "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying I need distance. Need to think without armed guards and assassination attempts, and..." She looked at her mother's frightened face. "I need to protect her, even if that means protecting her from you." The words landed like bullets. Lucian's expression shut down completely, all vulnerability disappearing behind walls she'd spent weeks breaking through. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled and absolutely devoid of emotion. "I understand. Victor will arrange private security for you and your mother. Different team, no connection to me. You'll be protected without being targets." "Lucien." "It's fine, Serafina. You're making the smart choice, the safe choice. I should have expected it." He turned toward the door, shoulders rigid. "Take care of yourself." "Wait." But he was already gone, footsteps echoing down the hallway with finality that felt like a door slamming shut. Serafina stood in the center of her mother's room, tears streaming down her face, knowing she'd just destroyed the most honest connection she'd ever had because keeping it meant accepting unacceptable risk. Her mother squeezed her hand gently. "You did the right thing, honey." Serafina wanted to believe that. Wanted to believe that walking away from Lucien would restore safety and normalcy to their lives. But as she sat beside her mother's bed watching guards patrol outside, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made the worst mistake of her life. Because Katerina was still out there, still planning, still determined to hurt Lucien by destroying what he loved most. And now Serafina had just removed herself from his protection, making herself an easier target than ever before. 3 days passed in suffocating silence. Serafina moved through her life like a ghost inhabiting someone else's routine. Classes at nursing school felt distant and unreal. Her apartment, once a refuge, now felt like a cage with walls that closed in tighter each night. The security team Lucien had arranged appeared competent and professional, but their presence reminded her constantly of what she'd walked away from. Her mother had been transferred to a different facility under a false name.
buried so deep in administrative paperwork that even Katerina's resources shouldn't be able to find her. Should being the operative word. Serafina checked her phone obsessively, waiting for another threatening text that would prove their safety was an illusion. Lucian hadn't contacted her once. No calls, no texts, no unexpected gifts arriving at her door. He'd simply vanished from her life with the same clinical efficiency he applied to everything else, and the absence carved a hole in her chest that grew wider each day. She told herself this was better. Safer. The smart choice her mother had called it. But late at night, when she couldn't sleep, all Serafina could remember was the way Lucien had looked at her in that hospital hallway, like she'd just ripped out something vital he'd been stupid enough to show her. On the fourth morning, Rebecca from nursing school approached her in the cafeteria with an expression somewhere between concern and morbid curiosity. "Are you okay? You look like you haven't slept in days." Serafina forced a smile that felt like it might crack her face. "I'm fine, just stressed about exams." "Right, exams." Rebecca sat down uninvited. "So the whole thing with Lucien Dreykov is over? The gossip sites are saying you two split up." "We were never really together. That's not what it looked like in those photos. He was pretty obsessed with you." Rebecca leaned closer, dropping her voice conspiratorially. "Is it true someone tried to kill your mom? I heard she had to go into protective custody or something." Ice crawled down Serafina's spine. "Where did you hear that?" "It's all over the internet. There are these threads on Reddit speculating about organized crime connections and revenge plots. People are saying Lucien's enemies targeted you to get to him." Rebecca's eyes gleamed with the particular excitement people got from other people's trauma. "That must have been so scary." Serafina stood abruptly, her chair scraping against linoleum. "I have to go." "Wait, I didn't mean..." But Serafina was already walking away, heart hammering against her ribs. If the internet knew about Katerina's attack, then so did Katerina, which meant the fake identity protecting her mother might already be compromised. She pulled out her phone and called the security team Victor had assigned. "This is Serafina Vale. I need an update on my mother's location and security status." "Ms. Vale." The voice on the other end was professional but tense. "We've been trying to reach you. There's been a development." Her blood turned to ice. "What kind of development?" "Someone attempted to access your mother's medical records this morning using legitimate hospital credentials. We caught it before any information was transferred, but the attempt suggests your mother's location may have been compromised." "How is that possible? You said the records were buried." "They were. Are. But whoever's looking has significant resources and technical expertise. We're recommending immediate relocation to a different facility." "Do it! Now! I'm coming there!" "Ms. Vale, that's not advisable. If someone's tracking you..." "I don't care. That's my mother. I'm coming there right now." She hung up before they could argue and grabbed her coat, already calculating the fastest route to the facility. Her hand shook so badly she could barely hold her car keys. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, exactly why she'd walked away from Lucien. But distance hadn't protected her mother, hadn't stopped Katerina from hunting them with methodical patience. Serafina was halfway to her car when someone grabbed her arm and spun her around. Chase Holloway stood there looking like he hadn't slept in days either. Disheveled clothes, bloodshot eyes, the kind of manic energy that came from desperation or drugs or both. His grip on her arm was too tight, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "We need to talk," he said. Serafina tried to pull away. "Let go of me." "Not until you listen. This is important." "I don't care." "Katerina's gonna kill you." Chase's voice cracked. "She's gonna kill you and your mother and probably me too, and I need you to understand I didn't know. I didn't know what she was planning when I hired her to..." "You hired her?" Serafina went very still. "Marcus said you paid him to track me, that you wanted surveillance because you were jealous." "I was jealous? You moved on to Lucien fucking Dreykov while I was..." Chase stopped himself, breathing hard. "But I never wanted this. Never wanted anyone to get hurt. Katerina said she could help me prove you were using him for money, that we could expose him and you'd come back to me. I was stupid and drunk and..." His grip tightened. "And now she's using everything I gave her to hunt you, and Lucien's going to kill me when he finds out." "Good." Serafina wrenched her arm free. "You put my mother at risk for your pathetic ego. You deserve whatever Lucien does to you. You don't understand. Katerina's not working alone. She has someone inside Lucien's organization feeding her information. That's how she keeps staying ahead of his security. That's how she knew where your mother was transferred. Chase's eyes were wild with panic. She told me last night, bragged about it, said Lucien's empire was going to collapse from the inside while he was too distracted protecting you to notice. The words hit like cold water. Someone inside Lucien's organization. A traitor feeding Katerina information about security protocols, locations, vulnerabilities, which meant everything Lucien thought he controlled was built on compromised ground. Who? Serafina demanded. Who's the traitor? I don't know. She wouldn't tell me. But she said it was someone close. Someone Lucien trusts completely. Chase grabbed her arm again, desperate. You have to warn him. Have to tell him before Katerina makes her move. I can't. I walked away from him, remember? And you... Serafina's voice shook with fury. You're the reason any of this is happening. You brought Katerina into our lives. You gave her the information she needed to hurt people I love. So don't ask me to save you from consequences you engineered. She shoved past him toward her car, but Chase called after her, voice breaking. She's planning something tonight. Said it was endgame. Said after tonight, Lucien would be destroyed and you'd be dead and there'd be nothing left to build on. Serafina stopped, turned slowly. What's happening tonight? I don't know. She wouldn't give me details, just said... Chase swallowed hard. Just said to stay away from the warehouse district near the docks. Said it was going to be a bloodbath. The docks. The territory Lucien had taken from Dmitri Constantine 3 years ago. The same territory Katerina's father had controlled before Lucien dismantled his operation. If Katerina was making a move there, it wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming what her family had lost while simultaneously destroying Lucien's empire. Serafina pulled out her phone and dialed Lucien's number with shaking hands. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. She tried again. Same result. 3rd attempt, and Victor answered instead. Ms. Vale, Mr. Drakov can't come to the phone right now. Victor, listen to me. Katerina's planning something tonight at the docks. And she has someone inside Lucien's organization feeding her information. You need to... I'm aware of the situation. Victor's voice was tight. We've been tracking unusual activity near the warehouses all morning. Mr. Drakov is currently coordinating response. Then let me talk to him. He specifically instructed me not to put your calls through. Said you made your choice and he's respecting it. The words felt like a knife between her ribs. Victor, please. If there's a traitor in his organization and Katerina's making a move tonight, Lucien's walking into a trap. He needs to know. He already knows. We identified the leak 2 hours ago. Victor's tone carried grim satisfaction. It's being handled. Who was it? Silence stretched across the line, then quietly, someone we trusted. That's all I can say. Victor, Ms. Vale, the best thing you can do right now is stay away. Go to your mother. Make sure she's safe. Let us handle this. He hung up before she could argue. Serafina stood in the parking lot, gripping her phone hard enough to crack the screen, torn between 2 impossible choices. Go to her mother and ensure her safety while Lucien walked into whatever trap Katerina had set. Or drive to the docks and risk everything to warn him about a danger he apparently already knew about. She should choose her mother. Should prioritize the innocent person who'd done nothing to deserve any of this violence. That was the smart choice. The right choice. Instead, Serafina got in her car and started driving toward the warehouse district. The docks occupied a stretch of waterfront that had seen better days decades ago. Abandoned warehouses lined streets where legitimate shipping had once thrived before organized crime claimed the territory. Even in daylight, the area felt hostile, all shadows and rust, and the particular emptiness that came from places civilization had given up on. Serafina parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, acutely aware of how exposed she was. No security detail, no weapon, nothing except stubborn determination and the sick certainty that Lucien was about to face something he couldn't control. The warehouse Chase had mentioned, or at least the one that looked most active, sat near the water's edge behind chain-link fencing. Black SUVs surrounded the building, and armed men patrolled the perimeter with military precision. Lucien's people, probably. Setting up defensive positions for whatever was coming. Serafina circled the block trying to find an approach that wouldn't get her immediately spotted and dragged away.
Behind the warehouse, a service entrance stood partially hidden by stacked shipping containers. No guards visible, probably considered too exposed to be a viable entry point, which made it perfect. She picked her way through the containers, heart hammering, and tried the service door. Unlocked, either sloppy security or deliberate bait. She pushed it open slowly and slipped inside, finding herself in a corridor lined with offices that had been stripped years ago. Voices echoed from deeper in the building, male, tense, the particular pitch that came from people preparing for violence. Serafina moved toward the sound, staying close to walls, until she reached a metal catwalk overlooking the main warehouse floor. Below, at least 20 of Lucien's men positioned themselves around the space, while Lucien himself stood in the center speaking with Victor and two others she didn't recognize. Even from this distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the cold calculation in his movements. "Confirm positions on the north perimeter," Victor was saying. "Katerina's people are set up in the adjacent warehouse, probably waiting for nightfall before making their move." "And the traitor?" Lucien's voice carried clearly through the empty space. "Secured. He's in the back room if you want to handle it personally." "Not yet. First we deal with Katerina, then I settle accounts with people who betray trust." One of the other men stepped forward. "Boss, this could be bigger than we anticipated. If Katerina's working with what's left of her father's network, we're looking at 50, maybe 60 hostiles. Our numbers are sufficient." Lucien's tone allowed no argument. Katerina wants revenge. She wants to reclaim territory her family lost. She's operating from emotion, which makes her predictable. We're operating from strategy. That's the advantage. And if she has other resources we don't know about, then we adapt. But we don't retreat. This ends tonight. Serafina watched from the shadows, seeing Lucien in his element, commanding, lethal, every inch the crime lord the media portrayed. This was who he actually was beneath the careful vulnerability he'd shown her. Someone capable of orchestrating violence with the same focus most people applied to business negotiations. She should be terrified, should recognize the danger in loving someone this ruthless. Instead, she felt her chest crack open with the certainty that she couldn't let him face this alone. Movement caught her attention, a door opening on the opposite side of the warehouse floor. One of Lucien's men emerged dragging someone in handcuffs. The prisoner's face was bloodied, one eye swollen shut, but Serafina still recognized him. Marcus, the floor manager from Blackthorn Club, who'd started this entire nightmare by accepting Chase's money. No, not Marcus. The man following behind Marcus made Serafina's blood run cold. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the same controlled efficiency as Lucien's other men. Someone she'd seen dozens of times over the past few weeks, standing guard outside her mother's hospital room or driving her to the estate. One of Victor's team, one of the men supposedly protecting her. The traitor wasn't some distant insider feeding Katerina information. It was someone in the inner circle. Someone with access to everything. Security protocols, locations, Lucien's personal schedule. Serafina's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out carefully and felt her heart stop. Unknown number. Text message with a photo attachment. The image showed the medical facility where her mother was staying. Not from outside. From inside. From her mother's room, showing her sleeping peacefully while a figure stood in the doorway, female, dark hair, holding something that looked like a syringe. The message beneath was brief. Checkmate. Come to the North Warehouse alone in 10 minutes, or I finish what I started with your mother. Tell Lucien and she dies. Try to run and she dies. Your choice. Serafina's hand shook so badly she nearly dropped the phone. This was it. The moment Katerina had been orchestrating since the beginning. Not a direct attack on Lucien. That was just the distraction. The real target had always been Serafina, drawing her out, forcing her to make an impossible choice between warning Lucien and saving her mother. She looked down at Lucien coordinating with his men, completely unaware that Katerina had already won. That while he prepared for one battle, the real threat was happening 3 miles away in a medical facility with compromised security. Serafina could scream, could warn him, could let him handle this with violence and resources while her mother died alone. Or she could walk into Katerina's trap and hope she could stall long enough for someone to notice. She backed away from the catwalk and retraced her path to the service entrance, breath coming too fast, mind racing through scenarios that all ended badly. Outside, she ran to her car and drove toward the North Warehouse with her pulse hammering in her throat.
The building Katerina had specified sat isolated from the others, windows dark except for a single light on the second floor. No guards visible, no black SUVs, just emptiness that screamed trap louder than any obvious threat. Serafina parked and climbed out on shaking legs. Her phone buzzed again. Second floor. Alone. You have 3 minutes. She pushed through the front entrance, unlocked, like Katerina knew she was coming, and climbed metal stairs that groaned under her weight. The second floor was a single open space gutted of everything except support columns and shadows. And in the center, lit by a single hanging work light, stood Katerina. She looked different than she had in the hospital security footage. Harder. More dangerous. Her dark hair was pulled back from a face that might have been pretty if not for the cold calculation in her eyes. She held a gun loosely in one hand, finger resting near the trigger with practiced ease. "You came," Katerina said. "I wasn't sure you would." "Where's my mother?" Serafina's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Safe. For now. I have someone at the facility ready to finish the job if I don't call within the next 15 minutes. But if you cooperate, she lives. Simple transaction." "What do you want?" "What I've always wanted. Lucian Drakov destroyed, his empire dismantled, everything he built turned to ash." Katerina smiled without humor. "And you're going to help me do it?" "I'm not helping you do anything." "Yes, you are. Because the alternative is watching your mother die on a live video feed while you stand here powerless to stop it." Katerina pulled out a phone and held it up, showing surveillance footage of her mother's room. "One call, that's all it takes." Serafina's chest tightened with rage and terror, warring for dominance. "What do you want me to do?" "Call Lucien. Tell him you're in danger, that I have you in the North Warehouse and I'm going to kill you unless he comes alone." Katerina's smile widened. "He'll come. That's the beautiful thing about people who love. They make stupid choices to protect what matters." "And then what? You kill us both?" "Then justice happens. Lucien watches you die knowing it's his fault, knowing his world destroyed you the same way it destroyed my family. And then," Katerina raised the gun, pointing it casually at Serafina's chest. "Then I put a bullet in his head and reclaim everything he stole from my father. Your father tried to have Lucien assassinated, twice. My father was protecting his territory from a foreign invader who thought violence gave him the right to take what wasn't his." Katerina's voice hardened. "Lucien came from nothing and built an empire on the corpses of people who had every right to defend themselves. He's not the victim here. He's the plague. And killing me fixes that? Killing you breaks him, makes him human again instead of the untouchable king he thinks he is. That's worth more than simple revenge." Katerina gestured with the gun. "Now call him. You have 2 minutes before I make a different call." Serafina pulled out her phone with trembling hands, mind racing through options that all led to death. If she called Lucien, he'd come alone and walk into an ambush. If she didn't call, her mother died. Either way, Katerina won. Unless she dialed Victor instead of Lucien. "Ms. Vale, Victor, listen carefully. I'm in the North Warehouse. Katerina has a gun on me and someone at my mother's facility ready to kill her. She wants me to call Lucien alone, but it's a trap. You need to—" Katerina lunged forward and ripped the phone from Serafina's hand, smashing it against the concrete floor. "You stupid bitch. I said call Lucien, not his second. Victor will tell him anyway. Victor will secure your mother's location first. That's protocol. Which gives me—" Katerina checked her watch. "Approximately 4 minutes before Lucien gets here with his entire army instead of coming alone like I wanted." She raised the gun, aiming directly at Serafina's head. "Which means you just made yourself expendable." Time seemed to slow. Serafina saw Katerina's finger tighten on the trigger, saw the cold certainty in her eyes that said she'd already made the decision to fire, saw her own death approaching in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Then the wall exploded inward. The blast knocked both women off their feet. Serafina's ears rang, vision swimming with dust and debris. Through the chaos, she saw figures pouring through the shattered wall, Lucien's men, moving with military precision, weapons raised. And behind them, moving like controlled fury made flesh, came Lucien himself. His eyes found Serafina immediately, scanning for injuries with the kind of focus that blocked out everything else. Then his gaze shifted to Katerina, struggling to her feet, still gripping her gun, and something absolutely lethal crossed his expression. "Drop it," he said quietly. Katerina laughed, wild, broken laughter that held no sanity. "You're too late. My people are already at the medical facility. Already killing." "Your people are in custody." Victor appeared beside Lucien, holding a phone showing security footage of armed men being arrested at the facility entrance. "We intercepted them 3 minutes ago. Mrs. Vale is safe." The certainty drained from Katerina's face, replaced by dawning horror. "No, that's not... You couldn't have... You relied on a traitor who'd already been compromised." Lucien's voice was absolutely calm. "We've been feeding him false information for the past 12 hours. Every position you thought you had was based on lies. Every plan you made was built on faulty intelligence. You never had the advantage, Katerina. You just thought you did." Katerina's hand shook, gun wavering between Lucien and Serafina. "You're lying. Check your phone. Call your people. You'll find silence." Lucien took a step forward. "It's over. Your revenge failed. Your father's legacy ends with you. Put down the gun before this becomes uglier than it needs to be." For a moment, Serafina thought Katerina might actually surrender, might accept defeat and live to face justice through legal channels. Instead, she turned the gun towards Serafina. "If I can't have revenge, I'll settle for pain." Everything happened at once. Lucien moved with inhuman speed, crossing the distance between them. Katerina's finger tightened on the trigger. Serafina dove sideways, instinct overriding rational thought. The gunshot echoed through the empty warehouse like thunder. Serafina hit the ground hard, breath knocked from her lungs, ears ringing. For a moment she couldn't tell if she'd been shot or if adrenaline was masking the pain. Then she saw Lucien standing over Katerina's body, his own gun raised, smoke still wisping from the barrel. Katerina lay motionless on the concrete, blood pooling beneath her head, eyes open and unseeing. Dead before she hit the ground. Lucien lowered his weapon slowly and turned to Serafina with an expression that shattered every wall he'd ever built. Raw terror. Relief. Something that looked uncomfortably close to breaking. "Are you hurt?" His voice cracked on the words. Serafina shook her head, unable to form speech. Lucien crossed to her in 3 strides and dropped to his knees, hands running over her arms, her face checking for injuries with frantic precision. When he found nothing, he pulled her against his chest hard enough to hurt, face buried in her hair, entire body shaking with adrenaline crash. "You called Victor," he said roughly. "You could have called me and I would have come alone. Would have walked into this for you. Why didn't you—" "Because I wasn't going to let you die for me." Serafina's voice was muffled against his shirt. "Not when I could. You almost died anyway." Lucien pulled back enough to grip her face between his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "She was going to shoot you another second, and—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "But she didn't. You stopped her. I killed her." "Yes. Does that terrify you?" Serafina looked at the man holding her so carefully despite having just ended a life to protect hers. Saw the violence he was capable of and the vulnerability he only showed her. Saw both versions existing in the same person without contradiction. "No," she whispered. "It doesn't." Something fierce and possessive burned behind his eyes. "It should." "Probably, but I love you anyway." Lucien kissed her like he was trying to prove she was real, still alive, still choosing him despite everything. Serafina kissed him back with equal desperation, tasting blood and gunpowder and the specific relief of surviving something that should have killed them both. Victor cleared his throat politely. "Boss, we should move. Police will be here soon." Lucien stood, pulling Serafina up with him, one arm wrapped around her waist like he couldn't bear to stop touching her. "Clean this up. I want every shell casing, every piece of evidence sanitized before authorities arrive. And get the medical examiner we have on payroll. I want Katerina's death ruled self-defense. Already handled." Victor's gaze shifted to Serafina with something that might have been respect. "Ms. Vale, your mother's secure. We're moving her to a different facility under layers of protection even federal agents couldn't penetrate. She'll be safe." "Thank you," Serafina managed. They left the warehouse through the hole Lucien's explosives had created, stepping over debris into cold night air that tasted like freedom. Black SUVs waited to transport them away from crime scenes and dead bodies, and evidence that would need to disappear before morning.
In the car, Lucien held Serafina against his side, fingers laced through hers like he was afraid she'd vanish if he let go. Neither of them spoke during the drive. Words felt insufficient after everything that had just happened. At the estate, Lucien led her upstairs to his bedroom, not the guest room, his actual private space, and very carefully helped her out of clothes covered in dust and gunpowder residue. He cleaned cuts she hadn't noticed getting, hands gentle despite the violence they dealt hours ago. "I thought I lost you," he said quietly. "When Victor told me you'd gone to that warehouse alone," his voice broke. "I thought I was going to be too late. But you weren't. This time. What about next time? What about the next person who decides you're the way to hurt me?" Serafina turned to face him, seeing the exhaustion and fear carved into every line of his face. "Then you protect me, and I protect you, and we face it together instead of trying to survive separately." "That's not a solution." "It's the only solution we have." She touched his face gently. "I tried walking away, Lucien. Tried choosing safety over you. It didn't work. Katerina still found me, still threatened my mother. Distance didn't protect either of us." "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm done running, done pretending I can have a normal life separate from your world. I'm in this completely, or I'm not in it at all. No more half measures." Lucien searched her face for doubt or reservation, and finding none, pulled her into a kiss that tasted like promises neither of them knew if they could keep. They fell into bed tangled together, exhaustion and adrenaline crash pulling them toward unconsciousness. "I love you," Lucien whispered against her hair. "Even though I shouldn't, even though it puts you in danger." "I love you too," Serafina whispered back. "Danger and all." They fell asleep wrapped around each other while outside, Lucien's empire continued operations and bodies disappeared into rivers and official reports were rewritten to protect the guilty. The war wasn't over. Wars like this never truly ended. But they'd survived the worst of it together, and somehow that felt like victory. Dawn broke cold and gray over the estate, and Serafina woke to find Lucien already dressed, standing at the window watching the grounds with the kind of stillness that came from making difficult decisions. She sat up slowly, body aching from yesterday's violence, and studied his profile in the weak morning light. He looked older somehow, more worn, like the weight of protecting what mattered had finally caught up with him. "How long have you been awake?" she asked. "Most of the night." Lucien didn't turn from the window. "There are things we need to discuss, things I've been avoiding because I didn't want to see you look at me differently." Serafina's stomach tightened. "What things?" "The traitor in my organization, the man who fed Katerina information that nearly got you and your mother killed." Lucien's voice was carefully controlled. "His name was David Chen. He'd worked for me for 6 years, saved my life twice. I trusted him completely." "Was?" "He's dead now. Victor handled it last night while we were—" Lucien stopped himself. "While we were dealing with Katerina." The casual mention of execution should have horrified her. Instead, Serafina felt only cold pragmatism. "Did he say why he betrayed you?" "Money. Katerina offered him $2 million to feed her intelligence about my operations, my security protocols, your location." Lucien's jaw clenched. "He took it because he had gambling debts he couldn't pay, because he valued his own survival over loyalty, and because he thought he could get away with it." "But you caught him." "We caught him because he got sloppy, started making calls from personal devices instead of burners, left digital fingerprints that led back to shell accounts Katerina controlled." Lucien finally turned to face her, and the exhaustion in his eyes was devastating. But the damage was done. He'd already given her everything she needed to target you, to get close to your mother, to nearly destroy everything His voice cracked slightly. "Everything I care about." Serafina crossed to him, bare feet silent on hardwood, and took his hands in hers. They were cold despite the room's warmth. "It's over, Lucien. Katerina's dead. The traitor's dead. My mother's safe. We survived. This time. But there will be others. People who see you as the way to hurt me, who understand that love makes me vulnerable in ways power never did." He pulled his hands free, stepping back to create distance. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "Okay. Can you actually live in this world? Not theoretically, not romantically.
Actually live here knowing that violence will always be close? That people will target you because of me? That every time you leave this estate, there's a possibility you won't come back? The question hung between them like a blade. Serafina wanted to answer immediately, to reassure him that love was enough to overcome fear. But Lucien was asking for truth, not comfort. And truth required her to actually examine what the past weeks had cost. "I don't know," she said quietly. "Yesterday I was terrified. I'm still terrified. But walking away didn't make me safer. It just made me alone while facing the same dangers. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have right now." Serafina moved closer again, forcing him to look at her. "I love you. I'm choosing you. But I can't promise I'll never be scared or never doubt whether this is sustainable. All I can promise is that I'll try, every day, to be strong enough for this. And if you're not, if one day the fear becomes too much, then we deal with it together. But I'm not making that decision today, not after everything we just survived." Lucien studied her face for a long moment before pulling her against his chest, arms wrapping around her with careful strength. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not. But you have me anyway." They stood there at the weak morning light, holding each other like the world might try to rip them apart again if they let go. Eventually, Victor knocked on the door with updates that required Lucien's attention, police reports to manage, media narratives to control, territory disputes that had erupted overnight when word spread that Katerina was dead. "I need to handle this," Lucien said reluctantly. "But first, I want to take you to see your mother. Make sure she understands she's safe." The new facility where Serafina's mother had been transferred looked more like a luxury resort than a medical center. Private suites, world-class staff, security so subtle it was almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. Her mother sat in a sunlit room overlooking gardens, reading a book with color in her cheeks that hadn't been there weeks ago. "Serafina!" She set down the book immediately, arms opening for an embrace. "I've been so worried. Victor said there was an incident last night, but wouldn't give me details." "It's handled, Mom. Everything's handled." Serafina held her mother tightly, feeling how much stronger she'd become since starting the new treatment. "How are you feeling?" "Remarkably well, actually. The doctors are saying the tumor is shrinking faster than expected. They're cautiously optimistic about full remission." Her mother pulled back to study Serafina's face with sharp maternal instinct. "But we're not talking about me right now. What happened last night?" Serafina glanced at Lucien, who'd positioned himself near the door, giving them space but close enough to intervene if needed. He nodded slightly, permission to share whatever felt right. "The woman who was threatening us is dead," Serafina said quietly. "She tried to hurt me, and Lucien stopped her. It's over, Mom. Actually over." "At what cost?" The question was gentle but pointed. Serafina's mother looked between her daughter and Lucien with the kind of understanding that came from years of watching people make choices they couldn't take back. "At the cost of becoming someone I didn't think I could be," Serafina admitted. "Someone who accepts violence as part of life, who understands that loving Lucien means living in a world where normal rules don't always apply." "And you're okay with that?" "I'm trying to be." Her mother reached out and squeezed her hand. "That's all anyone can do, honey. Try to be okay with impossible choices." She looked at Lucien directly. "You love my daughter?" "Yes, ma'am." "Enough to change? To become someone worthy of the future she deserves?" Lucien crossed the room and sat in the chair beside the bed, meeting her mother's gaze with raw honesty. "I'm trying. I'm moving resources into legitimate businesses, reducing the violent operations, trying to build something that won't destroy her by association. But I can't become someone completely different overnight. The empire I built, the connections, the obligations, they don't disappear because I want them to. I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking for effort, for you to value her safety and happiness above your empire." Serafina's mother's voice was firm despite her physical fragility. "Because if you can't do that, you need to let her go now, before she's too deep to survive leaving." "I know." Lucien's voice was rough. "And if that day comes, if I can't protect her or I become the thing that hurts her, I will let her go, even if it destroys me." The promise was devastating in its sincerity. Serafina felt tears burn behind her eyes, understanding that Lucien had just given her mother the only reassurance he could offer. Not guarantees of safety or promises of normalcy, but the commitment to prioritize Serafina's well-being above his own needs. Her mother nodded slowly, apparently satisfied. Then I suppose you have my blessing, though for the record, I think you're both insane. Despite everything, Serafina laughed, broken, exhausted laughter that held relief and terror in equal measure. Lucien's lips twitched into something almost resembling a smile, and the tension in the room eased fractionally. They stayed for another hour, keeping conversation light, avoiding the violence and trauma of the past weeks. When they finally left, Serafina's mother pulled her aside for a private word. Be careful, honey. Not just physically, emotionally. Men like Lucien, they love intensely, but they also consume. Don't lose yourself trying to survive in his world. I won't, Mom, I promise. Good, because you fought too hard to rebuild your life to let anyone, even someone you love, take it from you. The words followed Serafina back to the estate, settling into her chest like a warning she couldn't ignore. Her mother was right. She'd clawed her way back to nursing school, fought to create a future beyond debt and survival. Loving Lucien couldn't mean abandoning everything she'd worked for. That evening, Serafina sat Lucien down in his office and laid out terms that felt like negotiation and boundary setting and claiming space all at once. I need to finish nursing school. No interruptions, no emergencies that pull me away from classes unless someone's literally dying. Lucien nodded. Agreed. I need to work as a nurse when I graduate. Real work, not some token position at a hospital you donate to. I need to build my career on my own merit. Agreed. And I need us to have a life that isn't defined entirely by your empire. Normal things. Dinners that don't involve business associates. Weekends that don't revolve around territorial disputes. Space where we're just two people trying to build something together. Lucien was quiet for a moment, processing the requests that were really demands wrapped in gentle phrasing. I can't promise normal, Serafina. My world doesn't allow for it. But I can promise effort. I can prioritize you over business when it matters. Can create space for us that's separate from empire building. That's all I'm asking for. Effort and intention, not perfection. Then you have it. Lucien pulled her into his lap, arms wrapping around her waist. Anything else? Yes. I want to meet the people who work for you, not just Victor, everyone. I want to understand your organization, know who I'm trusting when you say someone's loyal. If I'm going to survive in your world, I need to actually understand it instead of being protected from it. This request made Lucien tense slightly. That's a dangerous knowledge. Everything about loving you is dangerous. At least let me be informed about the risks I'm taking. He studied her face for a long moment before nodding slowly. Okay, but it happens gradually. And some things, some operations, some details have to stay compartmentalized for your protection. Plausible deniability matters if legal complications arise. I can live with that. They sealed the agreement with a kiss that tasted like compromise and new beginnings, and the fragile hope that maybe they could actually make this work. Over the following weeks, Lucien kept his promises with surprising dedication. He introduced Serafina to his inner circle, not just Victor, but the accountants who laundered money, the lawyers who navigated legal gray areas, the security specialist who prevented disasters before they happened. Each person was professional, competent, and absolutely loyal to Lucien in ways that transcended simple employment. They're not afraid of you, Serafina observed one evening after meeting his logistics coordinator. They respect you. That's different. Fear is useful for maintaining control. Respect is useful for building something that lasts. Lucien poured them both wine, settling onto the couch beside her. My father ruled through terror, beat people into submission. It worked until someone finally killed him in an alley behind a bar. I learned early that loyalty purchased through fear evaporates the moment you show weakness. So you built loyalty through respect instead. Through respect and compensation and the understanding that I protect what's mine. My people know that working for me means security, good pay, legal protection, medical care for their families. In return, they give me competence and discretion. It was a more nuanced picture than Serafina had expected. Not a crime lord ruling through violence alone, but a businessman operating in illegal markets with the same strategic thinking legitimate corporations applied to competitive advantage. It didn't make his empire ethical, but it made it understandable.
She returned to nursing school that fall, and the whispers followed her through every corridor. Her classmates knew who she was now, not just Serafina Vale, the struggling student, but Serafina Vale who dated Lucian Drakov and survived an attempt on her life. Some avoided her like she carried contagion. Others tried to befriend her, hoping for proximity to power. Rebecca stopped speaking to her entirely after Serafina refused to provide gossip about Lucian's private life. But Serafina kept her head down, focused on her studies, and proved through consistent excellence that she'd earned her place regardless of who she loved. Her professors were harder on her than other students, scrutinizing her work for any sign she was receiving special treatment, but that just made her work harder. She would graduate on her own merit or not at all. The media attention faded gradually as new scandals replaced old ones. The story of the nursing student and the crime lord became yesterday's news, and Serafina learned to move through the world without constantly feeling observed. She took different routes to school, varied her schedule, maintained the security awareness Victor had drilled into her while refusing to live in constant fear. 6 months after Katerina's death, Serafina's mother went into full remission. The doctors called it a miracle. Serafina called it expensive treatment that Lucian had funded without hesitation. Either way, her mother was alive and cancer-free, and that was worth every compromise Serafina had made to get here. They celebrated at a small Italian restaurant, the same one where Lucian had taken Serafina on their first real date. The symmetry felt intentional, like closing a circle that had opened that night when she'd agreed to stay in his life despite knowing the cost. To survival, Lucian said, raising his glass, and second chances. To survival, Serafina echoed, clinking her glass against his. Her mother watched them with quiet understanding. You two have built something remarkable. Against all odds and better judgment, you've actually made this work. We're still figuring it out, Serafina said. Everyone is. That's what relationships are. Constant figuring out. Her mother smiled. But you're doing it with intention and honesty. That's more than most people manage. The evening passed with easy conversation and laughter that felt earned after months of surviving impossible situations. When they dropped her mother at her new apartment, fully paid for, naturally, Serafina felt something in her chest loosen. They'd made it. Through violence and betrayal and attempts on their lives, they'd somehow reached the other side intact. In the car driving back to the estate, Lucien took her hand and held it without speaking. The silence was comfortable now, instead of weighted with unspoken fear. They'd learned each other's patterns, learned when to push and when to give space, learned that loving someone dangerous meant accepting that danger as part of the package instead of constantly fighting against it. I have something for you, Lucien said as they pulled through the estate gates. If it's another designer coat, it's not a coat. He parked and came around to open her door, leading her through the house to his office. On his desk sat a small leather portfolio tied with ribbon. Open it. Serafina untied the ribbon carefully and found documents inside. Legal papers, dense with language she had to read twice to understand. Then the meaning hit her like cold water. These are business incorporation papers for a medical foundation. The Vale Medical Foundation, Lucien confirmed, focused on providing cancer treatment to patients who can't afford it. Full funding for 5 years, with plans to make it self-sustaining through endowments and donations from my, he paused, choosing words carefully, from my legitimate business operations. Serafina stared at the papers, throat tight. You created a charity in my name? In your mother's name, technically. Margaret Vale is listed as the inspiration, but yes. I've been moving resources into legitimate operations for months. This is part of that transition, taking money earned in darkness and using it to fund something that actually helps people. Why? Because you made me want to be someone worthy of you. And that person doesn't just take and destroy. He builds something that lasts beyond violence. Lucien moved closer, framing her face with his hands. You gave up your nursing dreams to save your mother. This foundation means other people won't have to make that same choice. That feels like the kind of legacy worth building. Tears spilled down Serafina's cheeks before she could stop them. Lucien, I can't erase the things I've done, can't become someone without blood on his hands. But I can try to balance the scales, can try to create more good than harm going forward. His voice was rough with emotion. This foundation is the first step. There will be others, slowly, carefully.
But I'm trying, Serafina. For you, for us, for the future I want us to have. She kissed him with tears still streaming, tasting salt and promise, and the specific relief of knowing she'd chosen someone capable of change. Not overnight transformation, not sudden redemption that erased past sins, just steady, intentional effort to become someone better than who he'd been. They made love that night with the desperate tenderness of people who'd almost lost each other and were determined never to take survival for granted. Afterward, lying tangled together in sheets damp with sweat, Serafina felt Lucian's fingers trace patterns across her spine. "I want to marry you," he said quietly. Serafina's breath caught. "What? Not now. Not until you've graduated and started your career and had time to be absolutely certain this is what you want. But eventually," he pulled back enough to look at her. "Eventually, I want you to be my wife. Want to build a life that's ours instead of just surviving in mine." That's a hell of a proposal. It's not a proposal yet. It's a warning. So you know where this is heading. So you can decide if that's something you want before we're too deep to turn back. Serafina studied his face in the dim light, the sharp angles, the scar through his eyebrow, the dark eyes that had seen too much violence but looked at her with careful hope. She thought about everything they'd survived together, every impossible choice, every moment of terror and relief and desperate love that shouldn't work but somehow did. "Ask me again in a year," she said finally. "When I've graduated and started working and we've proven we can actually build a life together instead of just surviving crises. Ask me then, and I'll give you an answer." "And what will that answer be?" "You'll have to wait and find out." Lucian smiled, rare, genuine, the kind of expression that transformed his entire face. "I can work with that." The year that followed was remarkably ordinary by their standards. Serafina graduated nursing school with honors, despite the scrutiny and whispers that followed her through every clinical rotation. She accepted a position at a pediatric oncology ward, not at a hospital Lucian donated to, but through her own merit in interviews where she never mentioned his name. The work was hard and heartbreaking, and exactly what she'd dreamed of doing before life had derailed those plans. She held the hands of scared children facing impossible diagnoses, administered treatments that made them sick before making them better, celebrated remissions and mourned losses, and came home exhausted but fulfilled in ways that had nothing to do with Lucian's empire. He gave her space to build that career without interference, attended her graduation without making a spectacle, celebrated her first day of work with a quiet dinner instead of expensive gifts. He was learning to be a partner instead of a protector, and the distinction mattered more than Serafina had expected. His empire continued evolving too. More legitimate businesses, fewer violent operations. He was extracting himself from the criminal world with the same strategic planning he'd used to build power within it, not abandoning his organization, but transforming it into something that could exist in daylight instead of shadows. The Vale Medical Foundation opened its doors 8 months after Serafina graduated, and her mother attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony with tears in her eyes. They'd helped 17 families in the first month alone, people who would have watched loved ones die because treatment cost more than they could afford. It wasn't redemption for Lucian's past, but it was progress. On a cold evening in early spring, exactly 1 year after Lucian had said he wanted to marry her, Serafina came home from a particularly brutal shift at the hospital to find candles lighting a path through the estate. She followed them to the terrace overlooking the gardens where Lucian waited in a dark suit, hands in his pockets, looking nervous in ways she'd never seen before. "What's this?" she asked. "A year ago I told you I wanted to marry you eventually, that I wanted to build a life together once you were certain this was what you wanted." Lucian crossed to her, pulling a small box from his pocket. "It's been a year. You've built your career, proven you can survive in my world without being consumed by it. So I'm asking now, properly. Serafina Vale, will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a ring that was beautiful without being ostentatious. Simple platinum band with a single diamond that caught candlelight and threw it back like a promise. Serafina looked at the man kneeling before her. Dangerous, devoted, trying so hard to be worthy of the love she'd given him despite every logical reason not to. She thought about everything they'd survived, every moment of terror and relief, every compromise and boundary and hard conversation about building something sustainable. "Yes," she said, "on one condition.
Lucien's expression shifted to cautious hope. What condition? That we keep trying, keep choosing each other even when it's hard, keep building a life that's ours instead of letting your empire define us entirely. Can you promise me that? Every day for the rest of my life. He slid the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into a kiss that tasted like new beginnings and hard-won happiness. They held each other in the candlelight while the city sprawled below them, violent and beautiful and full of people surviving the best they could. They married 6 months later in a private ceremony with only family and Lucien's closest associates present. No media, no politicians, no spectacle. Just vows exchanged between two people who'd chosen each other despite every reason to run, and promises to keep choosing each other going forward. Serafina's mother cried through the entire ceremony. Victor stood as Lucien's best man and gave a surprisingly emotional toast about loyalty and second chances. And when Lucien looked at Serafina while saying his vows, there was no trace of the cold crime lord who'd once terrified an entire city, just a man who'd found something worth becoming better for. Their first year of marriage had the usual adjustments, learning to share space, navigating career demands, figuring out how to balance Serafina's nursing schedule with Lucien's increasingly legitimate business obligations. They fought sometimes, made up, learned each other's triggers and boundaries, discovered that love required constant effort instead of just initial passion. But they were building something real, something that existed beyond survival and crisis management. A life that included quiet dinners and terrible movies and lazy Sundays where neither of them thought about violence or danger or the weight of impossible choices. 2 years after their wedding, Serafina discovered she was pregnant. The news terrified them both. Bringing a child into their world felt like the ultimate vulnerability, creating something innocent and precious that could be targeted by enemies who still existed despite Lucien's transformation. They spent weeks discussing whether to keep the pregnancy, weighing risks that felt impossible to calculate. In the end, they chose hope over fear. Their daughter was born during a snowstorm on a December morning, arriving 3 weeks early and screaming with impressive lung capacity. They named her Evelina Margaret Drakov, Evelina for Lucien's grandmother who'd been the only kind person in his childhood, Margaret for Serafina's mother who'd taught them both about surviving impossible situations. Lucien held his daughter for the first time with hands that shook, staring at her tiny face like she was a miracle he didn't deserve. "She's perfect." "She's terrifying," Serafina said from the hospital bed, exhausted and elated in equal measure. "We're responsible for an entire human being. We'll figure it out, like we figure out everything else." And they did. Slowly, imperfectly, with mistakes and fear and moments of overwhelming love that made the risks feel worth taking. Lucien became the kind of father Serafina had never imagined possible, patient, devoted, singing Russian lullabies at 3 a.m. while rocking Evelina to sleep. He'd built his empire through violence, but he protected his daughter with tenderness that suggested he was capable of more than anyone expected. Serafina returned to work part-time when Evelina was 6 months old, and they hired a nanny who'd been vetted so thoroughly she probably couldn't commit a parking violation without Victor knowing. Life found a rhythm that included pediatric oncology shifts, diaper changes, business meetings about legitimate enterprises, and the specific exhaustion of new parenthood. 5 years after Katerina's death, Lucien's transformation was nearly complete. He still maintained connections to his old world. Some obligations couldn't be severed without consequences, but the violent operations were managed by others now. He focused on real estate development, technology investments, the medical foundation that had expanded to help thousands of families. He wasn't a saint, would never be innocent of the things he'd done to build his empire, but he was trying to be someone his daughter could be proud of when she grew old enough to understand. On a warm evening in late spring, Serafina stood in their bedroom watching Lucien read bedtime stories to Evelina. Their daughter, now 3 years old with her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn determination, listened with rapt attention to tales of brave princesses and clever dragons who solved problems without violence. "One more story, Papa," Evelina demanded. "One more. But then sleep, little one. Those are the rules." "Rules are boring." Lucien laughed, deep, genuine laughter that Serafina had never heard in their early days together. "Tell me that again when you're 16, and I'll remind you of this conversation." Serafina's mother appeared beside her in the doorway, watching the scene with quiet satisfaction. "You did good, honey. You both did." "We got lucky," Serafina said quietly. "So many things could have gone wrong. But they didn't. You made choices, hard, scary choices, and they led you here. To this. That's not luck. That's courage." They watched Lucien finish the story and tuck Evelina into bed, brushing hair back from her forehead with the careful gentleness of someone who'd learned to be tender despite a lifetime of violence. When he emerged from the nursery, he found Serafina waiting in the hallway and pulled her against him. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything. How far we've come. How different life is from what I expected when I first saw you walk into Blackthorn Club." "Do you regret it? Any of it?" Serafina thought about the question honestly, about the fear and violence and impossible choices that had defined their early years together, about the compromises she'd made and the boundaries she'd set and the constant work required to build something sustainable. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret choosing you, even knowing everything it cost." "Good, because I'm not letting you go." Lucien's arms tightened around her. "Not now. Not ever." They stood in the quiet hallway of the home they'd built together, holding each other while their daughter slept nearby, and the future stretched ahead full of possibilities they'd fought to earn. It wasn't the fairy tale ending Serafina had dreamed about as a girl. It was messy and complicated and built on foundations that included violence and moral compromise. But it was theirs, hard-won and carefully maintained and absolutely real. And somehow, that was enough. Years later, when Evelina was old enough to ask questions about how her parents met, Serafina would tell her a carefully edited version about a struggling nursing student and a powerful businessman who fell in love despite belonging to different worlds, about courage and second chances and choosing to build something together instead of surviving separately. She wouldn't mention the violence, wouldn't talk about assassination attempts or betrayals or the cost of loving someone dangerous. Those stories belonged to her and Lucien alone. Private history they'd survived together and didn't need to burden their daughter with. But late at night, when Evelina was asleep and the house was quiet, Serafina would sometimes find Lucien standing in his office staring at old photographs. The warehouse district where Katerina had died, the hospital where her mother had nearly been killed, the Blackthorn Club where everything had started with a single moment of intervention that changed both their lives forever. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" she'd ask. And Lucien would pull her close and say, "Every day, and not at all." Because that was the truth of what they'd built. A life constructed from impossible choices and moral compromise and love that refused to be reasonable. It wasn't perfect, wasn't clean, wasn't the story anyone would recommend as a roadmap for happiness. But it was theirs. Every scarred, complicated, hard-won piece of it. And in the end, that was all that mattered. They'd survived. They'd chosen each other. They'd built something real from the wreckage of who they'd been before, and they would keep building it day by day for as long as they both lived, together.